Welcome to the Cybersecurity Modernization Summit presented by StateScoop and EdScoop. I'm Jake Williams, the Vice President of Content and Community for StateScoop and EdScoop, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today. For the last 9 years, the StateScoop and EdScoop teams have been working closely with technology leaders from across the country in states, cities, counties, and higher education institutions. We bring the top leaders from government and higher education together with the brightest minds in the private sector to exchange ideas, best practices, and find new ways to work together to serve residents and students better. Today's Cybersecurity Modernization Summit puts a lens on the information security piece of that equation, spurred by the ever-present threat of ransomware and other cyber threats. Along with an unprecedented amount of funding, government and higher education are poised to meet the threats ahead with strategies like defense in depth, identity and access management, and of course, zero trust. As always, we have some of the most prestigious leaders across the community here with us today. Our speakers include C-level executives from New York, Texas, and California, along with members of Congress and industry leaders as well. During the Cybersecurity Modernization Summit, we'll be discussing things like ransomware, hardware security, privacy, emerging threats, and so much more. The goal for today's sessions is that you learn something new, find a new opportunity to collaborate, and leave inspired to do something big. Please tweet along with us today using the hashtag CyberModSummit. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our sponsors: Akamai Technologies, Center for Internet Security, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, Proofpoint, Splunk, Verizon, Yubico. With that, let's kick off our program. I'm so excited to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, Representative Jim Langevin of Rhode Island. Congressman, take it away.
Hello everyone, my name is Jim Langevin, and I represent the 2nd Congressional District of Rhode Island in the United States House of Representatives. Let me say it's great to be with you today at the Cybersecurity Modernization Summit, and I want to begin by thanking StateScoop and EdScoop for the invitation to speak with all of you today and for convening today's important event. The question of how to better secure ourselves in cyberspace is one that I've thought about quite a bit during my 22 years in Congress. It became clear to me early on in my career that cybersecurity is one of the biggest national security and economic security challenges and issues of our time. And ever since, I've been working to draw more attention to this important issue on Capitol Hill. To begin with, I co-founded and still co-chair the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus and serve as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems on the House Armed Services Committee. I also had the honor of serving on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which, as you may know, was created by Congress and charged with the responsibility of creating an overarching strategy to better protect the United States against cyber attacks of significant consequence. While it's taken some time, those efforts have really started to pay off in a big way over the last few years. My colleagues in Congress have really started to see the need to make cybersecurity a priority. However, I can't take all the credit for that change. Unfortunately, much of this growing recognition is due to the significant cybersecurity challenges, attacks, and breaches that we still face as a country to this day. The rise of ransomware is near the top of that list. It's perpetrated a significant increase in the severity and frequency of cyber incidents that affect Americans every day. It's also widened the scope of potential victims. Our hospitals, schools, businesses, universities, local governments, and other community institutions are under constant assault from malicious cyber actors. Ransomware has also changed the way in which Americans experience the cost of these attacks. The compromise and theft of personally identifiable information is still a major and widespread concern. More and more often, cyber attacks are disrupting the services that we rely on in our daily lives. And it's not just the consequences of cyber attacks that are expanding. The transition to remote work and remote learning that was necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the composition of many networks, creating new apertures of vulnerability for hackers to exploit. For many state and local governments, along with schools and institutions of higher education, the problem is often compounded even further by the prevalence of legacy IT systems throughout their networks. This aging digital infrastructure leaves them incredibly vulnerable to cyber attacks. As this technical debt is carried forward, their information systems and the services that rely upon those systems will become more and more susceptible to cyber-enabled disruptions. And that's something that should be setting off alarm bells for policymakers everywhere. The past few years have illustrated how important these entities are to our country. A ransomware attack against a state or local government could seriously impair its day-to-day functionality and jeopardize Americans' access to things like vital services such as unemployment insurance, or vaccine scheduling. Or in the case of a local school, university, or other educational institution, a ransomware attack could seriously jeopardize that institution's ability to fulfill its academic mission, especially in a time where many students have had to take classes virtually. Improving the cybersecurity of state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and higher education institutions is critical to ensuring these institutions can continue to provide the vital services upon which we all rely. That's not something these entities can do or should, though, take on alone. Across all areas of cyber policy, we're grappling with the idea of shared responsibility, and I think it applies here as well. Eric Goldstein, CISA's Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity, said it best, and I quote, "The responsibility needs to fall on the entity most able to mitigate the risk," end quote. I think this is a very useful conceptual framework. In the context of our state and local governments and our institutes of higher education or local school districts, I think it points to the capacity that cloud service providers have to help manage cyber risk for these organizations. But the federal government has a clear role to play here as well by providing the resources required to help our governments and schools make necessary investments in their cybersecurity, including through IT modernization. It also means helping them understand the cyber threats they face and the steps they can take to mitigate those threats. So I'm glad to be able to say that we've made significant progress here. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, signed into law by President Biden last year, included one of the biggest investments in state and local government cybersecurity that the federal government has ever made. It created the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, which provided $1 billion for state and local governments to use in shoring up their networks. And just a few weeks ago, in passing legislation to fund the federal government, Congress dramatically increased the funding for the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. The MSISAC, as it's known, is a crucial organization supporting state and local cybersecurity, offering incident response capabilities, cyber threat advisories, tabletop exercise, malicious domain blocking and reporting, awareness and education materials, and other essential services for state and local governments. The increase in funding will allow it to expand these essential missions. So there are significant steps forward, but of course I wouldn't be here speaking with you today if the job was finished. We have so much more work yet to do. Though through the rest of this year in Congress will be my last, I believe that we have a real window of opportunity to continue raising the bar in our state and local governments and in our local school districts and institutions of higher education when it comes to cybersecurity. I'll be looking for ways to make the most of that opportunity until my very last day in office. So, one area that I'm currently exploring is how we can improve our empirical understanding of how well our cybersecurity policies and programs and technologies are actually working. We need to know more about the nature and scope of the attacks that different entities face and what security measures are most effective in reducing their level of cyber risk. So to that end, we need to collect better data around the cyber ecosystem, including information about cyber incidents and the controls put in place to prevent them. A solution that I'm exploring to this challenge is creating a Bureau of Cyber Statistics. So this is a recommendation from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission for a statistical agency that would collect, process, analyze, and disseminate essential statistical data on cybersecurity. Ultimately, the goal is to help us better understand what's working and what's not, in order to help us understand where to spend our next cybersecurity dollar. With a better understanding of causes and consequences of various types of cyber incidents, and a clear picture of what is working in preventing those incidents and what is not, state and local governments and institutions of higher education and local school districts would be better able to take more informed steps to manage their cybersecurity risks, and the federal government would be able to more efficiently provide the resources to help them to do it. Creating a Bureau of Cyber Statistics will be a priority of mine for this year, but I'll also be on the lookout for other opportunities to support state and local governments and local school districts, along with higher education institutions as they work to defend themselves from cyber threats. And I sincerely hope to be able to work with all of you in that effort. So we have, I know, many senior IT leaders and decision makers from state, local governments, higher education, and industry that are gathered here today. Your voices, input, and expertise are utterly essential to making real and effective progress in this space. It's why conversations like this are just so important. So I hope that you'll all engage with my colleagues and I on cyber issues, both the ones that we covered today and those that we will undoubtedly need to address together in the future. Solutions to cybersecurity problems are not always easy, and we need to make sure that we get them right. But I'm optimistic about our prospects for continued progress if we work together. So with that, thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Coming up next.
We're here with Mick Baccio, the Global Security Strategist at Splunk Surge. Mick, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Mick, you're what they call a recovering CISO, right? You were the CISO on Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign. You've worked in the White House, HHS, FDA, CDC. I'm sure we can throw some other acronyms in there. And of course, a bunch of different places across the cyber landscape. From all of that experience, tell me a little bit about what you're expecting from a cyber perspective in the year ahead.
Well, like you just said, my background is pretty much a career full of blue team network defense. So with that and my role here at Splunk as part of Surge, we crunch numbers, we look at data, we talk to folks, and we figure out kind of what strategies you can get ahead in 2022 and beyond. So I think with that, when I said in the predictions to get faster, we did a super empirical study of ransomware. Shannon Davis, one of our mad lads in Australia, basically took 10 ransomware families and let them run against each other, right? Who fastest one wins. And what we learned is that you've got about anywhere from 4 days to 4 hours to take care of your network, or you're going to be in bad shape. Average time was under 4 hours for 100,000 files across your network to be encrypted. So what that tells us is whatever we're doing on the defensive side, on that blue team side, we need to get faster at it. We need to get better at it. And that's kind of what we're looking forward to in that research, kind of releasing that and working with folks. Hey, what can we do to kind of help out with that process?
And so, when you talk about that research, you're looking to give defenders more knowledge and more confidence to detect these attacks more proactively, and obviously to deal with them. But tell me a little bit more about it and what specifically the public sector. You've spent a lot of time in the public sector. What the public sector should know.
What the unique thing about what the public sector and the private sector should know from a ransomware defense strategy is it's the same. Ransomware affects both industries. It's a global problem, and I think the response as well has to be global. The research friend Ryan Kovar, the team leader over at Surge, has the phrase "cognitive thought model" is what he keeps saying over and over again. So what we learned, I'm a big reader. Not all ransomware is created equal. Some ransomware is more equal than others, if we're kind of paraphrasing Orwell. We found that ransomware families, if you had a performance chart, if I'm an affiliate trying to sell you something as a ransomware operator, hey, use me, I perform faster than XYZ. And what we're learning from that is New Zealand CERT had a great paper that came out last year where they mapped the stages of a ransomware attack and from that to the MITRE attack framework. So now as a network defender, we have strategies of how fast ransomware runs, what the attack, stages in the attack are, and how to map those out. And as a network defender, we can now map our strategies, our defense strategies against that. And that's where that cognitive thought model comes into play. I now know that I guess, steps in a ransomware kill chain and how to defend against that. And what we're doing at Surge, kind of that, trying to find that easy button. Blue team work is it's never easy, it's just blue collar, grindy kind of stuff, but we're trying to get as close to that easy button as we can.
And so, I mean, when you look at, say, state and local government or higher education, they're at various stages of those frameworks, right? I mean, some of them have really small teams and they're just trying to stay above water. Others, giant operations, big, multi-million-dollar cybersecurity centers, but still struggling with some of these issues. I mean, what are some concrete, clear steps that folks at any step along that spectrum can do to deal with this surge of ransomware?
It's good. So I think no matter the size of your organization, whether it's in that SLED category, whether it's a private sector, or anywhere in between, what you can look to do is, one, implement multi-factor authentication. They say that the best time to start working out was in your 20s. I'm way past that. So next best time is right now. So it sounds, like a Herculean task, but implement MFA across your organization. And I guarantee the reduction in incidents reduced immediately. Beyond that, kind of asset identification. You can't know what to defend unless you know what it is. And that's really the ongoing grindy blue team work, is asset identification, patch those assets. When you patch things, they're less vulnerable. But I think the top thing is really multi-factor authentication, asset identification. And then beyond that, we're all in security. It's a community effort. You mentioned the smaller organizations out there that don't have budget for larger teams, larger tooling, things like that. Your strategies are free. So whatever strategy you implement is zero cost except sweat equity. And that is still a cost, but sweat equity is still equity. And beyond that, there are partnerships. There's a JCDC that Splunk is a part of. There's ISACs that are in every vertical and sector that you can imagine, including SLED, to give information, to give tooling out there, to give resources for network defense teams out there to kind of raise that bar. So leverage the community, multi-factor, asset ID, and leverage the community. I think those three things, no matter what year it is, those are kind of tried and true things that will work no matter what the landscape is going to be.
So, sort of on that same point, you talked about at the beginning, get faster, right? That's one of those big things that everybody has to do. That's a hard ask of the public sector, right? Bureaucracy, process, these things do move slow, sometimes by design. What advice do you have for state and local and higher education to get faster, to be faster?
To get faster, I guess my biggest recommendation is, find you a bill. There's a cat I work with, his name is Bill, and basically he is super into every piece of legislation that is released from the government. And that is proven to be the most invaluable thing, because the IT Modernization Act, cybersecurity is a big part of that. There is funding for you, for your vertical, if you're a state and local government, there's funding inside there specifically allotted towards you. They're just, you have to go get it. So make sure you look at the legislation that's being released, because with things like the IT Modernization Act, the government wants you to get better and will give you the resources to get better. They're looking for data cooperation, data sharing, incident reporting, things like that. And that's part of, raising the bar in security. There are resources available. Like I said, find you a bill, or not a bill, but whatever your version is, find someone who is super plugged into that. And again, I think there's ISACs, that pool of talent that exists, leverage that. And hey, what are the resources available? Also, you mentioned, they can't afford a really big tooling and may not be able to have that budget, but there is a budget for existing tooling. And I guarantee the vendors, Bill works for Splunk. So ask Splunk, and how do I get this monies from the federal government? it's there, and there's always resources available. Just go out and look for it. I think that's really the biggest thing, because everything I'm suggesting, sweat equity is still equity, but tools cost money.
You talked about how in some cases the year doesn't matter, right? 2022 isn't the big news item here, but I do want to go beyond this year a little bit and talk about the future. I mean, when we're talking about things like ransomware protection, where do you see it growing and changing in the years ahead? And ultimately, I guess that all comes down to how can folks be as prepared as possible.
So I think ransomware will continue to shift and evolve 2022 years ahead, as will every other threat that we're kind of looking at today. I think that with moving to a cloud model, I think everyone is kind of moving towards that. Things like zero trust become super important. Micro segmentation, multi-factor is a part of that. And I think it's that personal threat model that we all adopt. When we're learning more and more, the globe is becoming interconnected, and we're learning that security at the end of the day is a data problem. And it all comes back to, how that data moves around, what we're doing to protect it, or, what data we're okay with being out there. So, that security problem, that data problem is going to be ongoing, and it comes down to your threat modeling, those cognitive threat models that Ryan likes to talk about so much are super important. So figuring out, what your threat vector is, what your intelligence requirements are, and how to best defend specifically against that. You can't defend against everything, but the important things, are obviously the most important, but raising the bar little by little is how we'll get there.
And when you look back at your background, again, I mentioned the Buttigieg campaign, the White House, CDC, FDA, all of these organizations. When you look back and think about how that work influenced the work you're doing now, I mean, what's one big lesson? What's one big example of something that you worked on that really influences the stuff you're thinking about right now?
Wow, what is the biggest influence or memory? I think the biggest thing that I've learned throughout my career, is that the institution was there before you, and the institution will be there after you. So know that. And your role here as a security professional, that blue collar, blue team folks, the net defense, you want to keep the car on the road, keep driving, keep the program secure, and just kind of raise that bar little by little. I think the biggest thing is that, just take care of your piece, and you'll get better and better every day. But I think that was the biggest thing for me, was just the longevity of the institution. You are a small part of that, but your part is super critical.
That's awesome. And now, I mean, you're now part of Surge. Surge is doing some super cool strategic research. What else do we, other than what we've already talked about, the things that are on the streets now, what else do we have to expect from you and Surge going forward?
Wow. So this year, Surge, it's kind of a lot of research we've been kind of piling up for the past years coming out. The ransomware paper should be out by the time this is released. We're going to be at RSA, at Black Hat DEF CON. Conf is this summer. We're doing a lot of presentations there based on new APT research that we've done. John Stoner, one of the members of Surge, is kind of all over scenarios like, capture the flag, but if the flag was a Russian threat actor, this is the game you want to play. And doing that has helped out folks tremendously, because we've been able to take specific threat actor TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and hey, here's how you play a game to learn how those work. And something like that, the gamification of security is kind of, we like playing games and we like security. So the nexus of that is what bots is going to be. So I definitely check that out. But yeah, if you find us every other Tuesday, you'll see Ryan Kovar and I on our Coffee Talk with Surge show. Check it out on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we'll announce there what we're doing, but we'll be around and hoping to see everyone this summer.
Well, awesome. Mick, I hope to see you soon. Thanks for this, and look forward to talking again sometime.
Thanks for having me again.
To our audience, stay tuned for the next panel, part of today's Cybersecurity Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Freed, the technology editor of Statescoop and EdScoop, and today joining me are three privacy officers from state governments. We've got Katie Ruckel, the Chief Privacy Officer for the state of Washington, Darren Arnold, the Chief Privacy Officer for the state of Ohio, and Chris Bramwell, the Government Operations Privacy Officer in Utah. So we're talking today about privacy and data security and how that all folds into state government's broader cybersecurity missions and what citizens expect from their governments. So for the three of you, I want to start just by asking how your roles as privacy officers fit in with your state's broader cybersecurity missions and just state government in general. Katie, do you want to start?
Sure. I think in general, privacy fits in with state government through data management practices. And security is key for privacy, but privacy is also broader in that it takes into considerations a lot of the purpose for collection of data. And so the state is trying to make sure that when we're working with security, we're taking into consideration things like data minimization principles and those types of ideas in terms of helping agencies manage residents' data.
Yeah, and Darren, I know you do a lot of assessments in your job, assessments of programs in your job.
Correct. So I'm the Chief Privacy Officer in the state of Ohio is located within the Office of Information Security and Privacy. So we're sort of tied together at the hip. And as part of our security review process for our contracts, our team asked for privacy impact assessments and privacy threshold assessments, and that's actually even tied into the procurement system as well. So that's been a particular emphasis of ours. But we do, even apart from the procurement aspect, we do privacy impact assessments. That's a requirement in Ohio law, and that's been there for about 13 or 14 years.
And Chris, how about you? I know your position is pretty new. How does your role fit in?
Yeah, in Utah, we're actually very similar to Darren in Ohio. We have embedded privacy within the enterprise security group. So I actually work directly with Phil Bates, our state CISO. We utilize the same budget. And we're actually, for our privacy implementations, it's fairly new. We're building out our assessment processes, and now we're going to do that, but we're utilizing a lot of the same technology even to make it easier for agencies. Here we use RSA Archer. There's lots you can use, but we found agencies, usually privacy and security ends up being done by some of the same folks. So using the same tools as security, being in the same group, it's making it easier to get some of those foundational privacy components built.
What are some of the considerations that go in when you're talking to agencies that are developing services and applications that are going to be used by your state's residents? Anyway.
Well,
Was that,
was that for me? I'll take the first stab at it. So this is where I think the privacy impact assessments integrate nicely with the security. And then we do a security design review as well. So that way, when the state is embarking on major IT projects that handle personally identifiable information, there's overlap in between the teams in assessing the privacy impacts as well as taking into consideration security.
Yeah, likewise. So we recently had a security officer who had a conversation with a business owner in an agency who was preparing to implement a solution. And the security officer was like, well, is the system collecting social security number? And it was a cloud solution. And the business owner said, yes. And I said, do you really need that? And they're like, well, no, we really don't need it. And so we were able to eliminate social security numbers from that system and reduce the risk, both security and on the privacy side.
I think both of what Darren and Katie said is absolutely correct. And what they do is something that we are trying to build here in Utah. We're a little newer in our program. We've been focusing on really even defining the role and responsibility in the process. When you are implementing new technologies, what are specifically the system owner, what are their responsibilities when it comes to privacy? We do a lot with records management, but defining their privacy responsibilities, especially if it's not a codified responsibility, impressing upon them the importance of that and building that into the process has been a big risk mitigation effort we're trying to get in place.
So we've talked a bit about how it fits into state business operations, but privacy is data privacy is an ever-growing part of the public conversation. And wondering, in your day-to-day jobs, do you find that residents of your state are expecting stronger data privacy when they're dealing with governments? And what are some of the steps that you're taking? Chris, how about you? Chris,
I love this question. In Utah, my role was created and codified in 2021. In the same code, they created a right for citizens to submit privacy concerns to my office, specifically to require us to then review whatever that privacy concern is. And with that, we review the concern. We let the agency program know whether there are privacy issues that we found, and we propose recommendations for change. And we are also required to report those reviews and recommendations for change right back to the Senate annually. So in Utah specifically, the Senate has said, yeah, we are concerned about this, and we want citizen concerns to be taken seriously and us to make recommendations either for program changes or actual legislation to have standards across the board implemented.
Yep. And Katie, how about in Washington? I know there have been a few attempts to pass a data privacy law. I know you've also had some, you've been part of I think you've had some of the conversation about companies like ID.me and facial recognition technology. How are you addressing citizens' concerns about privacy?
So yeah, I believe that residents do have a higher expectation in terms of government protecting their information, just because they don't have a choice a lot of the times in whether or not they have to turn over their personal information to governments the way that they do in the consumer space. Although we have been trying to pass a consumer data privacy law in the state, and our policymakers are very focused on this issue as well. I think in terms of the facial recognition piece specifically, Washington did pass a facial recognition law to require a notice of intent and a very expansive or robust accountability report, as well as an opportunity to do public review and comment. The law actually requires at least 3 community consultation meetings before launching any type of facial recognition service in the state. And so our state in that way has focused on residents' concerns, especially around that type of technology.
And Darren and Chris, what is the facial recognition conversation come up in your states at all?
So we have an enterprise identity system that's public facing as well as internal, and we decided a long time ago. It was developed from a grant with a grant from NIST, and we worked with NIST Privacy Office. And as part of that identity system, we decided a long time ago that we would not use an external provider in terms of identity management. We do use knowledge-based authentication through credit service, but we are not doing facial recognition, and that was a decision that was made fairly early on. So we've that's just not a direction we've decided to go.
Yeah. I wanted to give you a chance, Darren, actually, to comment on the original question, just about what citizens are expecting from the governments when it comes.
Well, so we several years ago, back in about 2008, shortly after I became Chief Privacy Officer, we had a very high-profile privacy incident involving the 2008 presidential election and some questions to one of the candidates. And so we have strong legislation in place that makes it that sets the standard that when a state official is accessing confidential personal information, they do it for a valid reason. And we have technology solutions in place to help make sure that happens. There are criminal penalties to that. So it's for about 14 years now, we've had sort of a very high expectation that we're going to be responsive to the public's expectation. And I get questions about, how are we doing on privacy? And if we have a consumer-facing privacy law going through, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do internally to state government as well.
Yeah. And Chris, I know you were about to say something about. You had a thoughts about
facial recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Utah, we have something unique here that was created. We have a Personal Privacy Oversight Commission. It's a 12-member public commission appointed by the governor, attorney general, and our state auditor. And they are actually, they brought up facial recognition in addition to other concerns, but that's specifically one that they're authorized to propose standards and legislation around. So that's one of the hot topics that with that commission, essentially that represents the public for them. We anticipate using them to help figure out how agencies should handle some of those more complex personal information components.
Yeah. What are some, are there any, emerging issues on the privacy front that any of you think are, we'll be hearing more about? Obviously, we talk plenty about facial recognition and data standards, but are there any other emerging issues that are on the horizon? Darren, I'll let you go first on this one.
Well, I think overall, just with the increasing passage of privacy legislation, there is going to be a greater examination of, are we state governments doing what we're asking consumers to do? I mean, private companies to do. And so it's not just even are the rules in place, but how are we doing in terms of actually doing the work of privacy? So that would be one. And then, to be honest, I think identity proofing for the public is a very difficult thing to do. And we face a dual challenge of not doing things that are onerous, like facial recognition, while at the same time, we have a duty to make sure that people's identities aren't being stolen within state systems and being fraudulently used. And so we're had both of those privacy challenges going on and making sure that happens. And so I think that's one that's going to continue to be one that we're going to be looking at.
Katie, how about you?
Well, in the state of Washington, there's a focus on automated decision-making systems and artificial intelligence as well, and sort of concerns about some of the privacy impacts from using those types of technologies or impacts on civil rights and those types of things. So our legislature just this past session has focused in terms of asking for an inventory of automated decision-making systems from the state government agencies, and then probably going through and making sure that the standards being used by those systems meet our residents' expectations in terms of equitable treatment.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the technologies that you're using, the issues you're facing. I actually want to wrap up by talking a bit about the people who actually do this work. What are, I'm wondering, what are you all doing to get people focused not just on data privacy issues, but actually doing that work for state government? Chris, do you want to start with this?
Benjamin, this is a great question. I think this is a challenge every state is going to face as privacy becomes not just more important, but more state laws are passed requiring implementation of privacy practices. In Utah specifically, we're focusing on creating career paths for privacy employees, starting at entry level all the way through director level positions, so that staff can stay in these positions and get trained. And in addition to those set HR jobs, providing training for these staff as well to get certified to keep them in that career path.
Darren, Katie, anything to add to that?
Yes, I'm envious of Chris's model, and I'm looking to maybe try and replicate something to create the career path idea in terms of having people start out at entry level, because it is a difficult profession right now. And even there's a lot of competition for government to get privacy professionals with the private industry as well. And so right now I'm building a community of practice in terms of our privacy professionals and really trying to help provide training and information to them to build that workforce. But I think the model of creating a career track for privacy professionals is an excellent idea.
Yeah, and sort of similar to Katie's, we have data privacy points of contacts in each agency. And what we've discovered, or what I've discovered over the years, is a lot of times you can find a younger attorney or a new attorney who can serve in some of that role, and they're willing to grow into getting the expertise there on the privacy side. And so that's sort of the ad hoc way. But I agree, a formal role like Chris is talking about would really be helpful.
Yeah, well, we will watch how that all pans out. It sounds really interesting. Really fascinating to see if it can be replicated outside of Utah. But I want to thank all three of you again for joining the conversation today. I think we've touched on a lot of great points, and it sounds like you've all got a lot of interesting and exciting things going on in your states. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next.
We are here with Josh Hoffman, the National Surface Sales Director for Microsoft State and Local Government Division. Josh, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Josh, so much going on in the cybersecurity world today, and obviously the nature of cyber in the public sector is changing so much. What are you telling state and local leaders about building a good cybersecurity foundation?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's no question. I mean, it's a challenge in every industry and for every endpoint. The types of threats are continue to escalate in severity and in the level of depth. But what we really focus on with our customers is ensuring that our customers are looking at security sort of at every level of their infrastructure, right? And that there's the sort of obvious places that we all tend to focus on. How do we secure basic identity, our passwords, multi-factor authentication? How do we secure our email and things like that? But it's really important that we also look at physical aspects of the infrastructure, social aspects of the infrastructure, and certainly for my team that focuses on the endpoint devices, that we look at what's running on the computer that the end user is using on any given day, which might be a business device owned by their organization. It might be a personal device, but the layers of security that exist at that endpoint, not just in the cloud, not just in the server infrastructure, are also super important.
So when you're talking about that endpoint, you're normally talking about hardware, right? We're talking about a device, and it brings us pretty much the closest to the user that any threat vector can get. I mean, What does that mean for how government leaders need to be approaching hardware security?
Yeah, I mean, it means that the endpoint actually matters when it comes to security, right? I mean, again, we think a lot about the cloud infrastructure and the identity infrastructure, but what's running on the endpoint, both at the software level in the operating system, what we're doing in terms of preventing malicious code from executing is very important. And it's also really important all the way down to the physical hardware layer. So, with our Surface devices, for example, we think a lot about not just the technical security components, how the UEFI, sort of modern BIOS is created and managed through cloud infrastructure, but all the way down to actual supply chain security. Where are the components coming from? How is the physical factory space secured? When we think about the modern nature of these sort of threat vectors and the potential for state actors, we have to look at all the way down to the manufacturing process and the supply chain to ensure that there's not interference in that. And so security really does happen at every layer, from the time that the device is physically manufactured, from the time the button is pressed to power it on, and the security that's running before the operating system layer starts, all the way up from there.
So let's talk about something we definitely haven't talked about at all today and during today's event, but we definitely have COVID-19 and what it means for leaders going forward. I mean, from your perspective, how did the security landscape really change during the onset and the response to the pandemic when it comes to sort of more this physical, this hardware security, and then how does that change going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's one, I mean, 2 years in, we're still sort of struggling with in a lot of ways. The fact is, for better or worse, many of our state and local government customers, had not really embraced a hybrid work model prior to COVID, and they were forced to do so very quickly, under very sort of emergency kind of conditions, which doesn't always necessarily lend itself to a really well thought out, secure infrastructure. That's certainly to nobody's fault, but now 2 years later, everybody's realizing that in many ways, and for some really good reasons, hybrid work is the new normal. It introduces flexibility and agility that a lot of government agencies didn't have before. It helps attract and retain good talent, increases productivity, all of those great things. But recognizing that a lot of us went to that hybrid model, under duress, in a very quick way. We have to go back and think about how those devices are secured. How are we enabling, is it a completely organizational owned PC and we're moving from desktops to laptops and securing those just like we would traditional devices? Are we allowing more of a BYOD kind of model where end users are accessing work resources from their personal devices, whether that's a PC at home or a mobile device? We have to be much more thoughtful about security all the way down again to the sort of closest point to the end user, that proximity to the end user, as we adopt that new model. And again, for many of our customers, that means going back and looking at what we enabled very quickly 2 years ago and making sure that it's actually in keeping with the kind of security that's necessary for this to be the new normal going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you use the word thoughtful, and I think that that's such a key word in this space. I mean, one of the main challenges that cyber leaders have in the public sector is sort of that overarching strategic lens when it comes to something like cyber, because there are so many of these different facets. So how should agencies be incorporating this hardware piece of the puzzle, right, when we're talking about that on-device piece, into that overarching strategy? What's that strategic level look like?
I think what's most important in my mind is to make sure that we sort of break the thought process that the physical device is completely a commodity, right? And for our state and local government customers have an understandable sort of fiduciary responsibility to spend tax dollars wisely, as they should. And so ensuring that devices are appropriately priced and competitively bid and all of that kind of stuff is important. But I think pre-COVID, there was very much a thought process, especially in government, that a desktop is a desktop is a desktop, a laptop is a laptop is a laptop, and it doesn't really matter. It's just an operating system running on a piece of hardware. And what we're learning is that's not true. We have seen targeted attacks at the hardware layer that attack the BIOS or UEFI layer, that insert malicious code before the operating system and even boots up, whether it's rootkits or the Spectre attack or a number of different versions of that over the years. It's critical that we remember now that that we have to pay as much attention to the security components and technologies in the physical hardware as we do to the security components that we apply in the operating system and in the cloud. And so ensuring that there's that lens of security when we're choosing components, and that helps weigh the balance of, is it the cheapest device? That's certainly a variable for sure, but we also have to make sure that it's the most affordable and most competitively priced device that also meets the needs of the organization, and security has to be a component of that.
So even getting, you mentioned in an earlier answer, you talked about supply chain, getting into at that more granular level than just the hardware security, right? I mean, what advice do you have for that, beleaguered city or county CISO that has 2 IT staff and has to make all of these big decisions, and supply chain? Oh my goodness, just another thing to add to the list of focuses. What do they need to have in mind when making some of these decisions?
I mean, it's a really good point. And it's true at every layer of security that it's nearly impossible for, every individual organization to cover every base on their own. And that's where, it becomes really important to have good partnerships with your suppliers. And that includes certainly your cloud provider and your security technology provider, but also your hardware provider too. And I think the most important thing a CISO can do is just ensure that the questions are being asked, right? That lens is there, and that we're not thinking about hardware again as just a commodity, but that in the evaluation process, we're asking those questions about how the supply chain is managed, what security technologies are included at the hardware layer, how those security technologies are managed. The fact that they exist is certainly an important component, whether you turn them on and how you're able to manage and monitor them from a centralized through a centralized mechanism is also really important. And so, at the end of the day, I think it's important that, manufacturers like Microsoft and others are, making the right investments and delivering on those technologies. And we can't expect the CISOs to be at every layer of that, but ensuring that, in having strong partnerships with their suppliers, that they're asking those questions up front and ensuring that those requirements are built in, so that especially when we're responding to RFPs and all of that sort of thing, which is our everybody's favorite part of the process, that those requirements are called out.
So let's pull it all together here. Hardware has that proximity to the user. We touched on that earlier, which makes it sort of one of those last true lines of defense in a quote unquote defense in depth strategy.
Yeah.
I talked about my beleaguered city or county CISO. For some of these smaller governments, the hardware ends up being sometimes the only line of defense. What does that mean for how folks need to approach this now and going forward?
Yeah, I think it underscores the importance of thinking about security at this layer. I think, where we often see these kinds of scenarios where an enormous amount of investment is put on securing the sort of front door, right? That, how do we secure email? How do we secure identity so that, something that can't be sent to us that is malicious? And I think what we find especially in this world of hybrid work, is there's not really a front door anymore, right? That lots of devices are used on lots of networks in lots of physical locations, and we can't rely on the network perimeter as a line of defense in the way that it was done in the past. Or even the communication gateways like email, even if it's in the cloud, certainly security at that layer is important. But if an end user is working from a home device and accessing organizational resources, but also goes off and checks their personal email through an unmanaged application and gets access to malicious code, how are we making sure that both within the operating system and at the physical hardware layer itself, that last line of defense is in place, so that we recognize that the network perimeter is not the defense that it once was. We need to ensure that on any device that our users are accessing organizational resources from, especially ones that include, citizen data, financial data, all of those sorts of things, that security exists at every layer, and it's important to make sure that the hardware is part of that story.
That's great, Josh. So much more to cover, but I think we'll call it there. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And to our audience, stay tuned for more.
Coming up next.
We're here with Josh Molin, this SVP and acting GM of Operations and Security Services for the Center for Internet Security. Josh, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely, Jake. Thank you for having me.
So, Josh, it's a really hard time to be a cyber professional, right? I mean, it's unprecedented amount of threats. It's an unprecedented amount of time. Things are going so fast. So, what advice do you have for these security leaders on staying above water and keeping things moving?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jake. And you're absolutely right. We're hearing from our members that they're just overwhelmed from the number of attacks coming at them, the sophistication of the attacks, and also if the pandemic wasn't enough stress, just all the other things going on and the rush to work from home and all the security implications of that. So I think my biggest recommendation would be just to not get paralyzed by all of that, and also not admire the problem for too long, but just pick small little steps that you can take to enhance your cybersecurity program, and do as much as you can with the resources you have to try and tackle those biggest risks that exist.
So part of CIS's mission is providing resources and help through things like the MSISAC and other programs as well, to help folks sort of pick that thing that you're talking about in that first answer there. And so what are some of those recommendations? Where should folks start? What's a good way to cover a lot in a small amount of time?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, has a number of no-cost resources, whether you're a state, local, tribal, territorial government, or SLTT, or any organization. We've got our benchmarks that people can download and harden their systems against attacks. We also have the CIS critical security controls, which are 18 controls with safeguards included, that really walk you through what you should do to harden your environment. And in fact, we've put them into 3 implementation groups. So IG, or implementation group 1, 2, and 3. Implementation group 1 is what we call essential cyber hygiene. To us, it's just the bare basics that anyone should be implementing. And it's things like having an asset inventory of your hardware and your software, and patch management and things of that nature, knowing who has accounts and who's got privileged accounts. So that is a great way for organizations to know how to start, because that is one question we get a lot of is, how do I even start my cyber program? Where do I begin? What are those things that are the biggest bang for the buck? And we've looked through, based on the research we have, we've published a document called the Community Defense Model, or CDM, that's available on our website. And based on our research, we found that by implementing just the safeguards with implementation group 1, you can harden your environment against almost 80% of the top 5 attacks in the MITRE framework. So there's a lot of great work that can be done there by organizations, and I would really recommend that be a good starting place. Now, if you're an SLTT, we've got the MSISAC, as you mentioned, Jake. We also have the Elections Infrastructure ISAC. So if you're an election organization, it's no cost to join. We're funded through a cooperative agreement with CISA, and we offer a number of no-cost and low-cost cybersecurity products and services through that as well.
And so I want to be aware that we started the question kind of talking about how burnt out and tired a lot of cyber officials are, but I want to talk about that group 1, the implementation group 1 that you were talking about. What's next for folks? Maybe if they've got some of that stuff on lock, what's the next step for them to approach?
Yeah, I think after you have got some of that implementation group 1 things done, particularly in light of the kinds of attacks we're seeing now, I would focus on detection response capabilities, and assuming that you are going to be breached, how quickly can you identify it, respond to it? So things like enterprise level logging, which surprisingly you can do if you have some technical skills fairly inexpensively, at least getting logs coming into a central location, making sure you have things like endpoint protection, a DNS security solution. Now for SLTTs, CIS offers a number of those things. So some of them, like our DNS security solution, is no cost for SLTTs. We also have endpoint security solutions that are available, that and our Albert monitoring for networks. So if you're at that IG1 level and you're ready to take it up, I would certainly start looking at the visibility. Do you have intrusion detection and prevention systems? Is your firewall configured correctly? Do you have logging enabled? Are your endpoints secure? And really just start going up in the maturity levels. Now, we have IG2 and 3 as well. So those will help you with some of that roadmap. And the other thing I would just say is organizations have to take a risk-based approach to this. So there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all once you get that basic essential cyber hygiene things accomplished. So just making sure that you know what are your individual risks and threats and vulnerabilities, so you can make an informed decision as you start planning what your roadmap should look like.
And you talked a little bit about some of the programs that you do that are funded through CISA, the cybersecurity agency within DHS. One of the other big news items that's happening with CISA right now is these grants for state and local cybersecurity that'll be administered through FEMA. Do you have any advice for folks, whether it's CIO, CISO level decision makers within state and local governments, or even executive level folks on how to get prepared for those grants?
Absolutely. So we have done a lot of work in the MSISAC, specifically on this grant program and just understanding what the legislation says. We've been working with our partners at CISA. So we're still waiting for formal guidance to come out from CISA on the application process and what that will look like. However, what my advice, and to your question, Jake, is we do know what's in the legislation. We know that organizations are going to have a cybersecurity program plan, and they have to address certain things in there. So my advice would be read the legislation, understand what is in there, because that's not going to change. How they collect that information is still TBD, but we do know they'll need that information. So I would start now with figuring out what is your cybersecurity plan. If you don't have one now, begin drafting one and being ready. So when that call for information comes out, you can submit it however that will look once they figure that part out.
And another challenge, maybe more of an opportunity than a challenge when federal funding comes in, is really a lot of collaboration between CIO, CISO level technical folks, and maybe some folks in the governor's office, in the legislature, people across states who really maybe don't have that hands-on technical experience on how to get some of this stuff done. How are you working with the leaders that you talk to and giving them advice for things like communicating technical information to executives?
Yeah, and that is certainly a challenge. That's something we hear a lot of, is the cyber and IT folks know the problems and the challenges, but getting that executive level understanding is definitely challenging. So we're doing a couple things that are interesting at CIS. One is we've relaunched our mentorship program in the MSISAC. So we're pairing up early career IT and cybersecurity people in SLTT organizations with those more senior that are probably CIO, CISO level, or have at least been doing this for a very long time, to help them understand how to craft that messaging to get it up into executive level hands, but also making sure that when you do present or talk to executives, you're focused more on outcomes and the risk, and not technical information like number of vulnerabilities or how many patches have been deployed. Executives will get glossed over when you start talking that way. So making sure you're discussing, how does this impact our organization, our business, and making sure you put it in those specific type of terms that business executives will understand. And I think once you figure out how to crack that code with your unique executives, things really start opening them up. Or opening up, whether it's funding or at least just more support for programs or even policies that need to be implemented. All of that can be very helpful to further the program.
That's great. And let's sort of pull it back to where we started, right? When we're talking about, while we're on the subject of advice for executives and folks in the decision-making chair, let's talk about advice for leaders on how to help their teams best when we're talking about that mental health, that wellness thing, about everyone being burnt out and the challenges that comes with. What advice do you have for them? What recommendations do you have for them? What words of wisdom and encouragement do you have for those folks?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. It really is a challenge for all of us. If you look right now, there's 700,000 plus open cybersecurity positions across the United States alone. It's very difficult to recruit and retain cybersecurity talent and keeping the employees engaged. And I think one way as leaders we can help this is just acknowledging the challenge that our cybersecurity folks are going through. They are being inundated with all sorts of sophisticated attacks. And then when you layer on activity we're seeing from China towards state and local governments, the Russia-Ukraine war, all of those things that are just amplifying these challenges, we have to make sure our people understand, one, we don't expect them to work 24/7 and carry the full burden of this on their own shoulders. As a cybersecurity professional, we always feel like we have to get it right 100% of the time. The bad guys only have to get it right one time. And so that in itself is a burden, but making sure your people are taking some time off, as hard as it may be, but it's really important for that break, and not expecting people to be working 24/7, and resourcing them appropriately as much as your organization can do, and really helping them, making sure if you have an employee assistance program that they're aware of it and that they can use it. Because not only do we have all this work stuff going on, but everybody has their own personal challenges and stressors as well. And that's sometimes been amplified by the pandemic. So I think just being intentional about knowing what your employees are up against, acknowledging you realize that they're under a lot of stress, and doing whatever you can to help out will go a long way.
Josh, great thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing them, and thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, stay tuned for more from today's Cybersecurity Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
We're here with Mike Maxman, the Chief Information Security Officer for San Francisco, California, Montserrat Atun, the Chief Information Security Strategist for Providence, Rhode Island, and Greg McCarthy, the CISO of Boston. Thank you all for being here so much.
Thanks, Jake.
So let's talk about collective defense. It's something we've covered before in events like this, but I'd love for you to put a fresh spin on it here today in the context of our Cyber Modernization Summit. So Mike, let's start with you. I mean, let's set the stage for this moment in local government. I mean, how do you see the approach to modernization and cybersecurity in general changing right now? And what are some of the unique challenges that local governments are presented with?
Thanks, Jake. I think it is a unique moment. We are seeing the threat of international conflict spill over into local governments who we're being told are the best targets because they don't raise to the level of war targets, but yet are painful enough for nation states to attack and cause conflict in the United States. So local government is right in the middle of everything that's going on right now. And at the same time, we're seeing more effort by the federal government in actually helping, or at least initial attempts to help the local government to step out game in cybersecurity, which is so needed. But what we recognize is that local governments can't withstand by themselves nation-state attacks. And even though attempts by the federal government are embryonic, kind of first attempts, so we need to really start considering different models of cybersecurity to protect local government, whether it's statewide models, whether it's regional models. There's great pilots around the country that are focused on this collective defense. The basic premise is that not one of us can do it together. And we can't wait for the federal government to protect all of us. There's just enough money, not enough time, and not enough focus on local government. Yet we are in the focus of nation states. So we have to step up game. We have to connect with each other. And one of those connections is a coalition of city CISOs where Greg and I are leading the charge in actually combining the voice of so many different local governments in the United States and presenting a unified perspective.
And Montserrat, I mean, you bring such a unique perspective from a city like Providence, which maybe isn't as big in the headlines as a Boston or a San Francisco, but certainly a unique challenge nonetheless. I mean, what are some of the challenges that you're facing when it comes to securing your enterprise? And how does some of the stuff that Mike's talking about there fit into that?
Yeah, so everything that he said was on point. I think that local government gets ignored a lot of the time in terms of, having the latest updates to security. I feel like the private sector is really good to making sure that they're on point with all of the latest or up-to-date, frameworks and making sure that they're doing everything that they need to do to protect their systems. But I feel like in terms of government, it's always about budget and always about what gets approved, But I think with this attention from the federal government and the state government to really say cyber is a priority, it's allowed us to basically promote what we've been saying for years, right? This is not new. It's not like cybersecurity just happened all of a sudden. We've been talking about this for years, but now the rest of the country is talking about this with us. So I think the great thing about Providence is that we have a real opportunity to collaborate because we're on a smaller scale, right? So it's 2 degrees of separation. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody, and it's really great in terms of connecting in that way. So one of the things we're doing is making sure that we're connecting, collaborating across the state so that we as the city's capital can make sure that our defense is in collaboration and combination with the state. Because if anything happens for the city of Providence, it happens to the state of Rhode Island, right? So we're having a lot of conversations about what defense looks like statewide and not just on, the local scale, because that doesn't work more.
And Greg, I'm going to sort of bring that same question to you. Boston is certainly not immune to any of what we're talking about here, and things like hybrid work and the new way of operating have sort of really changed the game for cities. And so, how does all this together for you present additional security challenges in Boston?
So I think when we're talking about collective defense, I think one of the areas that will be interesting to see play out is how the infrastructure bill and the cybersecurity funding in that infrastructure bill facilitates, or in some cases may force, collaboration between local governments and the state agencies. I think historically, local government and the state have worked together, but minimally, with the infrastructure bill requiring the state to submit the plan with input from local government. It is forcing local government to come to the table and have these conversations with our state partners and understanding what the plan is. 80% of the funding is going to go to local government. So it's really important that our voice is heard and is part of the plan that our respective state submits. So I think this will be an interesting collaborative opportunity that may be happening already, but hopefully facilitates a much stronger connected and integrated conversation between local government and the state agencies.
Yeah, and in that vein, I mean, when we're talking about collaboration, when we're talking about collective defense, I mean, tell me a little bit about how you're facilitating that collaboration. You know, you talked about some efforts in Massachusetts. Obviously, Mike and you are the co-chairs of the City Coalition of CISOs. So tell me a little bit about how you're facilitating that collaboration. And Greg, we'll go to you first, and maybe, you know, add some more flair of the infrastructure funding as well and how those conversations are unfolding.
Sure. So I think when it comes to collaboration and collective defense, the Coalition of City CISOs has built a strong connection with CISA and is serving as one of the voices for local government to CISA. So we provide some constructive feedback to them on both the services that they provide, but also what does it look like as a municipality to implement, say, a grant funding program. So how do we use these funds? What are we doing in our municipalities that could be models for other states or local governments to adopt? We are using UASI funds in Massachusetts to create a cyber liaison or create cyber liaison group that's helping smaller municipalities that surround Boston to strengthen their cyber posture. So that's one model that could be applied. So kind of like a regional city CISO or a regional municipal CISO that serves multiple municipalities. That's one example of a model that we're providing. But the coalition is helping to bring together these different ideas. Montserrat spoke about some of the collaborative efforts that she's doing in Rhode Island. So I think a lot of these really great ideas we can adopt across the country and take the best of these ideas and recommend them to our state agencies or the federal government.
Can I just
Yeah.
add to that for a second? So I feel like Greg also, I just want to give you a shout out because Greg has been great about adding me and adding the city of Providence to a lot of the conversations that are happening nationwide. And I think that type of collaboration is helping not just at the state level, but now I get to, you know, pick the brains of other people across the country to say, okay, what are your problems? You know, maybe we have the same problems, maybe we can troubleshoot this together. So props to Greg for that. And I think more sort of conversations and more introductions to the Coalition of City CISOs, for example, you know, was a great introduction for me. Thank you for that. And other opportunities like that just makes the opportunity to attack cyber on the local level that much easier. So just to his point, I think, you know, yes, at the state level and at the regional level, but even, you know, across states, I think it's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, and Montserrat, you've convened a group in Rhode Island to sort of do this sort of collaboration. I mean, tell us a little bit about that and the perspective that bringing all those people together has really been able to give you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Providence Information Security Advisory Council, and it comprises of folks from CISA, comprises of people from FBI, from a state government. We have the state CISO on there. We have private sector folks. We have outside counsel. And it's really just an opportunity for us to take pretty much everybody who's talking about cyber across the state and come together in a room and figure out how we can work together, like Greg said, to, you know, sometimes our problem is not just local, maybe multiple municipalities are having the same issue. We don't need to have, you know, a different CISO for every single city. You know what I mean? I think it's really important for us to pool our resources and figure out what's going to be the best across the state. So we convene once a month and we have conversations about pretty much any and everything, right? It's like our own little ISAC where we share information about, technical threats and stuff like that. But it's also an opportunity for us to specifically look at Providence's infrastructure and how we can improve our relationship at the state level, and how we can make sure that, if there's anything that we're working on that could be improved with resources from the state or resources from other municipalities, we're implementing that in real time. So it's been really beneficial, but it's also fairly new. So it's growing, and we're hoping that we can continue to add more and more groups. Like Greg, I would love to have you on our council, you know what I mean? So that we can continue to expand our level of conversation. So I think right now we're focusing on the local, but I think it could get bigger and bigger, just in terms of like the thoughts of different folks to come in and really share what best practices are.
Yeah, that's great. And Mike, Greg talked about the coalition. We've been talking about the coalition a bunch here, but I want to hear your perspective here, both in San Francisco and from the coalition view. I mean, how are you seeing this collaborative, effort and collective defense in this, as we said in the beginning, sort of this new moment, with things like the infrastructure funding sort of changing the game for tech and government a bit?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a new moment, Jake, and we're seeing more focus on cybersecurity, more willingness to consider cybersecurity as the key risk to local government. I think that's something that is absolutely different than from a few years ago. In fact, in San Francisco, the mayor issued their first executive order on cybersecurity, specifying specifically that it is one of her administration's top concerns. And we've seen that level of focus from elected officials, I think, around the country when we talk through the coalition members. And it's important to, that collaboration, that Montserrat talked about. We find that as the coalition members get together, we get to learn from each other, share with each other much more than we've ever done before. Local government is really finding its footing right now. For us at San Francisco, we're also part of the state, and we're trying to figure out what that federal funding would look like. We have lots of large cities in the state, over 50 counties. It looks like we have already good models. For example, there's in Los Angeles, this LA Cyber Lab, which brings together private and public organizations together to share, threat intelligence. Here in the Bay Area, we're also building a Bay Area regional group of CISOs based on the Aussie region, but also looking at new models of regional cooperation. We're exploring whether regional MOUs, joint agreements, maybe a governance structure even, kind of looking around that this is all new types of efforts that we've never seen before, but that's what it takes. And we have to look also to other regions such as Washington State or Texas or Chicago or Detroit to look at what the models there are. Because I think we're finding ourselves at this precipice where, I kind of link it to, with the big fires that often happen in the Bay Area, kind of the way that our fire departments have grown up and worked together and can collaborate, can stand up an emergency operations center at a minute's notice. We get the state and the federal volunteers come in. We need to think along the same roles of how do we support each other? How do we have this volunteer or maybe standing by force that can rush to each other's help, right? How do we buy together maybe better? That's very new for us to think about, hey, can we really see something that we can invest in together as a region? Capabilities, maturity. I know that that's another focus for CISA, for the coalition, and for us in the Bay Area.
It's a great answer. And you sort of did what my next question was going to be, which is sort of to look ahead to what this collaboration can look like at a longer term level. So I want to throw that over to Montserrat. We're talking about collaboration. You talked about how it's relatively new in the Providence area. Obviously, the coalition itself is relatively new as well. But, what does this collaboration look like for you longer term? What does this enable you to do down the line?
I think the possibilities are endless. We're coming from a culture of, I can't tell, right? Like if something happens in my organization, don't tell anybody, don't share information. We're shifting from that to no, let's share information so that we can support each other and be preventative in nature so that the same problem doesn't occur later. And I think the benefit of that is that if you have an issue, you could be protecting me from a future issue and vice versa. We're going to need each other at some point going forward. So I think just the visioning and the conversations that are happening now around cyber is just a great start. But I think that the possibilities are endless. I think we're going to get much better about being preventative and really supporting our infrastructure on the federal level, but also on the local level and state level. I think it's going to start at the local level, to be honest, and then it's going to rise up to the federal level. You know what I mean? But it's really just going to be us having conversations and being willing and forthcoming to provide information to each other, and then us as a network, I was going to say global network because I'm thinking global, but like as a national network first, and then maybe as a global network, we can start to think about how to be just more thoughtful about being preventative in nature. But I think that we're creating our framework now, right? We're building a framework that doesn't exist, and that's the beauty of it, right? So I think if we continue to think about what that framework should look like and work with CISA, and help them understand what our issues are on the local level, then it will only build for a greater national infrastructure going forward. So I think the possibilities are endless.
That's great. And Greg, last words from you. I mean, what does this collaboration enable for you down the line?
I would echo what Montserrat said. I think the global network is spot on. We've spoken with colleagues in The Hague, in our cities to the north in Canada. And I mean, everybody is facing the same challenges in local government, regardless of where you are in the world. So I think having that network of colleagues that share a passion and a desire to ensure that we're protecting our respective municipalities, but applying best practices around that is really important. And I think building in that speed in actually putting those preventative measures in place is really critical. One of the things that the Coalition of City CISAs is working on, Mike touched on a little bit with the LA Cyber Lab, a threat intelligence sharing network that helps to share indicators of compromise that Providence is seeing, that San Francisco is seeing, that Detroit, that New York, all are seeing, that we can both feed information into, but also pull information from to help protect our municipalities more quickly and more effectively. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity to figure out how to standardize that information sharing cross city lines, cross state lines, cross country borders.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up here. Montserrat, Greg, Mike, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for the time, and look forward to hearing more in the years ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And stay tuned for more from our Cybersecurity Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
We are here with Helen Patton, a global advisory CISO for Cisco. Helen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me today, Jake.
So Helen, state and local governments, as well as higher education institutions, are receiving or about to receive a good amount of funding from federal action, including those much sought after cyber grants in coming months. So how do you see some of these folks spending some of that money?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That certainly the sector has been underfunded from a cybersecurity perspective for a really long time. And so I know there's a lot of people who are super excited to be able to get their hands on that funding. The mechanics are a little twitchy, actually. So what I'm seeing is a lot of effort, particularly at the state level, to be able to coordinate funding requests that really maximize the value of the dollars that they're getting. So I'm seeing state agencies offer, for example, fusion centers that can be leveraged across the state and local environment for their entire state. I'm seeing departments of education looking for funding solutions that would do workforce education so they can start bringing up cybersecurity professionals in their world and transitioning people who are looking for roles in cybersecurity more quickly into the profession. I'm seeing higher education institutions looking to really beef up what they're doing to support research and critical infrastructure that they're doing research of as part of that as well. So, you know, really I'm seeing collaborative use of dollars as opposed to individual institutions or agencies applying individually. And I think that's an actually really good trend.
You know, I think collaboration is such an interesting point to hit on. You're seeing recent announcements from states like New York, where they have, you know, they're creating physical spaces to bring cyber leaders together and really just help each other out. You know, and you're also seeing collaboration in the face of a lot of ransomware attacks and a lot of challenges that state and local and higher ed leaders are seeing. I mean, what are you seeing in that space? How are you seeing collaboration really come to the fight when it comes to things like ransomware?
Yeah, ransomware is interesting, right? We see ransomware attacking every vertical, but when I look at the impact of ransomware, it's definitely hitting state, local, and education particularly hard. Some of it is the nature of the kind of technology we run in our environments. It's not cloud native. It's not a really clean technology stack. We've got lots of things happening in our education environments, in our agencies. And so part of the opportunity, I think, is for folks to look at what they have in their technology stack, what's old, what needs refreshed, and really having an active program to be able to get at those things. And in doing that, make security more efficient, make technology more efficient and easier to use from a customer, end user, constituent perspective, but also maximize those dollars that are coming in as well. So you know, ransomware continues to be a big problem for all of us, but it's the sharing, again, the sharing of those resources, but putting the dollars where it really helps. And where we're seeing that is in the detection and response side. So again, going back to fusion centers, the ISACs and ISAOs that provide information into organizations, those kinds of areas really maximize the dollars that are coming through and get us more prepared to be able to detect and respond when something happens, because something happens all the time.
You know, when you're talking about detecting and responding, you know, a big part of that is sort of, it rings true in the news that we're hearing lately on zero trust and some of the guidance that we're seeing from the federal government. Now, granted, you know, we hear a lot in the state and local space that state and local and higher ed, they're not explicitly bound to those executive orders or to those policies, but a lot of them are following really closely. Yeah. How are you seeing some of that zero trust work develop and change in the SLED sector?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're watching the policies coming out of the White House and the OMB and CISA really carefully. And I'm really impressed with the work that's coming out, actually. I think it's well thought out. I do think it's actionable. The challenge is always, of course, the time frame. So in the security world, we recognize that zero trust isn't something that is one and done. It's not a project you're ever going to be finished. And yet some of the advice coming out of the federal government is have a plan in the next 6 months or so and execute that plan in the next 2 years or so. Well, Google's been doing zero trust in their own way for 10 years and they're still not done. And if Google with all their resources can't be done in 10 years, I don't think any of us in SLED are going to be able to do that either. However, I think there's a lot of goodness that is coming out of those requirements. And I think it's a good thing that state, local, higher ed, K through 12 are looking at those as guidance for how they should be running their own programs as well. So, you know, having a well thought out identity management plan, having really good, strong authentication factors from a multi-factor perspective, having good asset management, having good vulnerability management and patching and a reporting capability for when things do go wobbly are all really just basic security controls. And now we've wrapped them in this package and we've called it zero trust. But really, I think it's a good foundational practice to have. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the federal government goes with it, because it is going to change the way they operate. There's no doubt about it. And that takes time. So we'll see what happens.
I want to go really quick to something that you said at the beginning of your answer. You were talking a little bit about some of the different ways that state and local agencies are looking to spend that money. You mentioned education departments sort of investing in the workforce and investing in workforce development programs. It's such an interesting thing. I've been doing this job for 8 years, and we've been talking about the workforce pretty much the same way for most of that time. But I think part of that is because workforce really is a long game, right? If you train kids in schools now, then you got a couple years before they're in the workforce. I mean, what's something different about the workforce movement right now, and about some of the projects and initiatives that some of these folks are doing to train some of this talent?
Yeah, you're right. It starts early. A lot of the research I've done suggests going back as far as elementary school, for example, to get kids thinking about it, identifying with security as a potential thing for them to be interested in. We're seeing a lot of the funding come through even at the high school level to be able to support just basic computer science classes. So we're starting to see curricula that talks about how do you be a digital citizen in today's world, where your data isn't kept local, where a company controls the data. How do you behave appropriately? How do you think about privacy and security in that context, right? So I see it being a part of the general curriculum, not just the computer science curriculum. So that's in the K through 12 space. In the college spaces, we're also recognizing that the technology is changing so fast that it's hard to craft a curriculum that stays relevant. And certainly the security community is critical of higher ed in terms of how practical the curriculum really is. They want people who are going to come out of college or come out of a community college who can hit the ground running in terms of being able to do work, not just have a sense of theory. So we're seeing the methods around training in higher education starting to accelerate as well. More use of internships, more use of co-ops, more use of the concept of an apprenticeship structure to the learning, which I think is really useful. And then I think the other thing that's interesting about SLED is we don't typically pay to market, right? So we're trying to attract talent in an already very tight labor market without having the right kind of salary implications that need to go along with it. We're starting to see some changes, but really it's a struggle, particularly for higher ed and K through 12 to keep up. So we're starting to see people think about what are the other factors about working in security that attract people. We see a big service element that comes out of this. You know, the national security narrative is actually very exciting to students. They want to be able to come in, serve their country, if you will, in a way that may not be a military service, but they see cybersecurity as a way of doing that. And so I think we're starting to see people think creatively about how to attract people into cybersecurity in the SLED vertical, which can't happen fast enough.
And let's talk really quick about the workforce as it stands right now. I mean, it's been a chaotic 2 years for everyone, but especially for those IT leaders in state and local government and higher ed as well. What advice do you have for some of those folks who kind of might feel burnt out, might feel tired? What advice do you have for them as they, continue a really important job?
Yeah. It is super hard, and burnout and stress is really a problem for this particular industry for sure. The advice I'm giving people these days is to be really clear on boundaries. I think one of the challenges of security and IT is there isn't a conversation happening in your agency where security and IT doesn't have a role to play. But we can't be everywhere at once, and we aren't really expected to be everywhere at once, but I think people in the industry feel obliged to be. So I think we have to do a better job of setting our own boundaries in terms of, yes, I'm going to focus on this because it's a compliance need or it's a risk-based, threat-based need. And these other things, I'm going to say, I'm going to let go. And we've got to be able to establish those boundaries so that we have some rational energy consumption in our day-to-day. I'll be interested to see what happens as society sort of opens back up, whether that changes the way we work again. Probably won't, I don't think. So we've also got to get used to how do we maximize the way we're working today to be more effective. So as is always the case with security and IT, continue to learn. continue to learn, continue to grow, but really, making sure that you focus on the important things and not the unimportant things. Yeah.
Let's stay on the advice train. Helen, we've covered so much ground. We've covered ransomware. We've talked about zero trust. We've talked about workforce. We've talked about how to spend all this money.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for folks right now, right? When they,
Yeah.
as soon as this event is over and they get back to work, what should they be working on? What should they be focusing on in terms of getting the job done?
Right. So Cisco did a security outcome study. The first one was 2 years ago. We did another one last year. It will be an annual kind of report. And the study looks at what are the activities that the security teams or an organization can be doing to have an effective cybersecurity program. And interestingly, one of the main things, one of the top activities that result in the best outcome is having a really clean technology stack with security technologies well integrated into that stack. So that means looking at your environment and seeing where you've got old stuff, seeing where there's a refresh opportunity. It's the legacy stuff that becomes technical debt that makes it more expensive to have a security program. It makes it more difficult to do active response when you need it. So it's not really a security function per se, but being able to work with your technology partners and say, let's have good current technology, let's have a really active plan to keep our technology up to date is going to go a long way towards having a really good security program. So call to action coming out of this meeting is go take a look at your environment. And if you don't have an active plan to address technology debt and legacy technology, go get one.
That's great. Helen, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate all this great advice and a bunch of great highlights on what we've talked about.
Thanks so much, Jake. It's been great.
And to the audience, stay tuned for more from today's Cybersecurity Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
We're here with Debbie Blythe, an executive public sector strategist at CrowdStrike. Debbie, so happy to have you joining us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jake. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So Debbie, before you joined CrowdStrike, you were the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Colorado. Let's talk a little bit about that experience and how it influences your work now at CrowdStrike. I mean, in February of 2018, the Colorado Department of Transportation was hit with ransomware, hitting 2,000 some computers, and I think it was like $1.5 million in recovery costs. Tell me a little bit about what happened and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, wow. Initially, we started getting hundreds of calls to the help desk. So, it was just a normal day in the life of, running security for the state. And we started getting calls to the help desk saying, my computer is locked up. There's a note on the screen saying, if you want to see your files again, you'll pay the ransom. And so initially we started treating this like a normal run-of-the-mill malware event, not really understanding the scope of what was impacted. And so we started kind of machine by machine, knocking out taking it offline, cleaning it up, trying to put it back online. And about a week into that effort, we realized that all of the work that we'd done thus far hadn't amounted to anything because it just felt like it was snowballing. And so eventually we kind of said, okay, we need to escalate this to more of a critical event within our incident response plan, called in our partners, got the Office of Emergency Management, the Colorado National Guard, and really started treating this more like the large scale incident that it was. We spent about 2 weeks eradicating, containing the malware, and then about 2 weeks restoring and recovering the services for CDOT. So in all, CDOT was down about a month while we worked to get this, recovered. And what it was SamSam ransomware.
So, I mean, we could probably fill all of today's entire event, not just this session, with the advice and the thoughts that you have for folks in the public sector based on this experience. But
Yeah.
but when you hear from now in this role, when you hear from a CIO or a CISO, what are the first few pieces of advice that you're bringing to them for this?
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't mention, Jake, is that the entry point for this attack actually came from public cloud infrastructure. So we had a well-trained on-prem server administrator that brought up a virtual server in public cloud infrastructure to test out a new business process for CDOT. It was only meant to be up a couple of weeks. Put it up there, test it out, take it down. So it wasn't configured correctly. And there was sort of a critical mistake that was made. And all of our standard security controls like logging, like account lockout, all of those types of things were not configured. And so when the system came under attack the day it was created, it was compromised within 48 hours, and it became the entry point into CDOT because it was actually joined to the CDOT domain as if it was a local on-prem system. And so a lot of times when I talk to other CISOs around the nation, some of the things that I ask them about are, are you building in the cloud? Because so many state and local governments have modernization strategies and digitization strategies underway that are making use of public cloud infrastructure. And so, we talk about how do you know what's in the cloud? How do you know how it's configured? How do you make sure you have good governance over that process? And, certainly training your infrastructure staff on how to secure cloud systems. Those are all the things that are kind of top of mind for CISOs kind of around the nation right now.
So we've heard a few times today in today's event about some key technical tactics that leaders can deploy to be most effective against threats like ransomware. What have you learned at a more technical level that is best for these leaders to do to fight against those threats?
Yeah, a great point. So one of the technical things that we talk about is ensuring that you do not have remote desktop open to the internet. That is one of the quickest ways, as we discovered in Colorado, to be compromised. And so one of the things that I think we didn't realize until it happened to us is that when you click at that box that says assign to me an external IP address, it automatically opens remote desktop to the internet. And that's not in just one of the public clouds, that's in all 3 public clouds. And so knowing that, so, training your infrastructure team to be able to configure cloud systems securely, and then also having the ability to do discovery in all 3 public clouds to know what assets you have out there and to know how it is configured. Also using immutable infrastructure. So having a secure build, almost like a gold image, where you always start with that as your standard base image, and ensuring that all of your tools are pre-configured. So don't leave it up to the administrator to decide what they're going to turn on or what they're going to deploy. Have it pre-configured so that there's no mistakes that can be made. Those are some of the things that are really, really critical when it comes to deploying systems in cloud infrastructure.
Another key theme that we've been talking about in today's event really has been around collaboration, whether we're talking about cities working together or collaborative entities like the MSISAC or the LA Cyber Lab. Now in your role at CrowdStrike, I mean, how are you advising leaders to really facilitate some of that collaboration? And really, I mean, collaboration is a fine word, but really just work together.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I am talking to so many states across the nation who are really reaching out to local governments and trying to create that collaboration. I'm seeing a lot of states that are doing that. We were doing that in Colorado as well, but so many states were so far ahead of us in that area. One of the things that we did in Colorado is we created a Colorado Threat Information Sharing Network, which basically allowed local governments and the state and all state agencies to sort of sign up to quickly share information amongst each other. And so that's one of the first things I did when CDOT happened. And all of a sudden I realized that, here's how we were attacked, here's how we were compromised. And oh my gosh, this could happen to somebody else. And so sent that information out quickly through the Colorado Threat Information Sharing Network, so that all of my local peers would know how to protect themselves. But the very next thing that I did was I reached out to the multi-state ISAC, MSISAC, and told them the same thing. And I said, if this happened to me, and seriously, my staff is super, super smart. If this happened to us, this could happen to anybody. And so I worked with them to get a briefing put together that went out to, state and local entities across the nation to say, look for remote desktop and make sure that you're locking down your cloud infrastructure. And then only a few weeks later, we created, or we had held a webinar in which through the MSISAC, almost 700 of my peers, state and local CISOs across the nation tuned in to hear exactly what we went through and point by point, exactly what we did to contain it and recover, and what they should do to protect themselves. So, and then I heard from so many of my peers later that was extremely helpful for them, because it gave them, steps that they could actually go and do right that moment to make sure that they were secure. So I think, whenever you are in possession of some sort of nugget of knowledge that could potentially help anyone else, it's so critical to have those relationships already established, like with the MSISAC, where you can just sort of reach out and they can be that voice, that one to many, to get that information out, which really is helpful.
And finally, while the 2018 ransomware event that you went through was obviously a landmark experience, it has unfortunately been repeated over and over and over again across the public sector. But things have changed a bit since then. There was this whole pandemic thing in the middle of it. But what has changed from your perspective, and how does that help or even hurt folks in the fight against these threats?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I mentioned is the only reason that I knew that I was under attack was hundreds of calls from the help desk sort of after the fact, as machines were already locked up and users are saying, I don't know what to do. I was running a legacy on-premise antivirus solution that didn't detect it, didn't prevent it, didn't even tell me there was an issue. I was so annoyed because Sam ransomware had actually been around since 2015, and it totally took down my agency in 2018. And so I went back to that legacy antivirus provider and I said, look, this is 3-year-old malware. Why didn't my tools at least detect this? And they said, oh, that was a new variant. And so it really speaks to the fact that, as the variants continue to evolve, just simply having signature-based legacy antivirus is not helpful. And so there are so many much better native cloud-based security capabilities that will protect you, that are evolving as the adversary is evolving their techniques. It's not waiting on a new signature to be developed. So that's one of the things that, if state and local governments haven't updated their tool set in a few years, they really need to do that, because having all of those legacy tools in place is leaving them potentially open to being a victim. Another thing that we saw that was really something surprising to me is in the SolarWinds attack. It was basically the adversary used SolarWinds as an ability to create a backdoor within our environments, everybody's environment. What they did then was compromise the local on-premise Active Directory. And when I thought back to the cybersecurity insurance questionnaire that I filled out a little over a year ago, one of the questions was, how are you authenticating your cloud-based infrastructure? Are you using your local on-prem Active Directory? And I thought, well, duh, yeah, of course we are. Click yes. Well, I didn't really put that all together, but what we saw was that SolarWinds Sunburst attack, once they compromised on-prem Active Directory, they used that to traverse directly to the cloud, compromising that cloud infrastructure. And so what happened to us with CDOT was the opposite. They compromised cloud and moved onto on-prem. But what we saw with Sunburst was they compromised on-prem, going directly to the cloud, bypassing two-factor authentication. And what I've learned since is that nearly 80% of cyber attacks leverage identity-based attacks to compromise legitimate credentials. Then the attacker uses typical administrator tools and techniques. So in that way, they are able to move laterally through the environment and evade detection. They just look like an administrator. And so what we really need to be thinking about is how can we layer security on top of our Active Directory infrastructure to prevent these types of attacks from being successful, to protect identities and privileged accounts and service accounts without relying on Microsoft Active Directory security, because that is just too flawed. And we've seen that over and over and over again. And so certainly, that's what I'm seeing that's kind of top of mind to CISOs around the nation right now is, if we really want to protect ourselves from ransomware events, then we really need to evolve our security strategy to prevent all of the ways in which the attacker has evolved their techniques from being successful.
Debbie, we could talk all day, but it's been so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, Jake.
Coming up next.
We are here with three Los Angeles area cyber leaders: Chris Covino, who's a policy advisor for the Los Angeles Cyber Lab; Tim Lee, the CISO for the city of Los Angeles; and Jeff Aguilar, the CISO for Los Angeles County, California. Tim, Chris, Jeff, thanks for being here with us today.
Morning, Jake.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
So everyone, we're talking about collaboration in cybersecurity, specifically with a lens on Southern California here. Chris, you're obviously part of the collaborative entity, the LA Cyber Lab, and also part of the coalition of city CISOs. Tell us a little bit about why collaboration is so important and what you've learned from having the chance to facilitate it.
Yeah, so I mean, the kind of term I always use is collective defense, right? And you asked, why is collective defense important? And for Los Angeles and even nationally, I kind of put it into like three different categories, right? For Los Angeles specifically, it's extremely connected. We have multiple different special districts and a very clear division between county and city government on a lot of things. For example, K through 12 is Los Angeles Unified School District. That's separate from the city, separate from the county. The county controls public health. The city of Los Angeles does not have a public health department. County does elections. City does not do elections. Public transportation is a separate organization. It's LA Metro. So there's all these different entities doing different things, but it's all very interconnected, right? LA County alone is 88 separate cities. And then you look at the LA Metro area in general, it's 14 million people. The economy is nearly $1 trillion. And you even kind of take that a step further, we do a lot of sharing. The collaboration here expands to, obviously other state, local, and federal partners throughout the country. Like you mentioned, the coalition of city CISOs, we work very closely with CISA. The security of the federal government, security of other states is actually also vital for the LA region, right? So a lot of LA residents depend on federal programs, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, et cetera. There's a service disruption in DC, it's going to impact our citizens here. And then clearly we rely on the public private sector, both big and small, locally and nationally, to do a lot of things. A lot of our servers aren't in California, they're in data centers, cloud servers, et cetera. So there's a lot of that there. And then, LA's critical infrastructure is actually really key for the rest of the country. We talked a lot about the ports the last few months, the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles are very key for the whole country. So, keeping that infrastructure, both the actual ports and the infrastructure around LA is vital. Just because the port's working, if we have all our traffic lights down, it's going to be a huge impact to those goods trying to leave the port to the rest of the country. So kind of keeping that in mind. And then the last kind of thing I want to just bring up quickly is this whole cyber problem requires that kind of shift in thinking about this. It can't just be about individual systems. It has to be about, looking at this as an ecosystem. Isolated defense isn't sustainable, right? Resources are limited, collaboration is key, and this is especially key or important for state and local government because we don't have the resources, we don't have the the budgets to really pull in that talent at the same level of a private sector company. And the last point I'll make on that is, at the end of the day, good public policy, because my background's public policy, so I'm going to come from that angle. Good public policy is about creating stability, it's about creating opportunity. And if our area is constantly bombarded by cyber attacks, disruptions, cyber related or not, it's going to impact the opportunities and just the general stability of the region. So those are all the reasons that I kind of point to why this kind of collective defense attitude is absolutely necessary against this cyber threat.
That's super helpful. So let's dive into the history just a little bit. I mean, Tim, you've been working with, and you and I have talked about your work with the LA Cyber Lab for quite some time. I mean, how did this all come to be, and how's it grown from your perspective?
Sure. Actually, LA Cyber Lab started from the internal need for collaboration. So if you think back before 2013, city 40 departments with 4 SOCs running silo, right? It's not unique. It's everywhere organization are running silo in the cybersecurity operation. So Mayor come up with the executive directive number 2 to form a cyber intrusion command center to coordinate the cyber defense and response. And that's the first attempt for the city of Los Angeles come up as an organization to break the silo. And that's the first, I would say, the collaboration platform that we built within the city of Los Angeles for internal collaboration. So from that CICC, Cyber Intrusion Command Center Collaboration Group, we established the integrated SOC. Integrated SOC now, so we ingest in the city of Los Angeles about 1 billion security-related events to analyze. And based on the simple concept of know yourself and know your enemy. And one of the key in the know your enemy is cyber threat intelligence sharing. So integrated SOC is producing very actionable intelligence and IOC and share back with our internal city departments for prevention and response. And from that, we come up with, okay, since we are producing that kind of actionable intelligence now IOC, why don't we share with and then coordinate with other entities within the city of LA business partner to share the IOC with them. And that's came up with the LA Cyber Lab as a first public-private partnership by the local government. And I have 3 stakeholders. One is the public, city government, plus the state and federal partners. And then from the private, the security vendors and the business communities. And also academia from the higher education. So 3 partners come together to collaborate on cyber defense and emergency response.
And Jeff, I want to bring you in here as well from the county perspective. Chris did a really good job at the beginning, sort of explaining the delineations between all of the different pieces that make up this effort. How did you all get involved in LA Cyber Lab, and how do you see some of this growing into the future?
Yeah, great question. It's kind of an interesting story how LA County became involved. We're not fully subscribed yet. We're working on getting there. A lot of points of integration. But it comes back to just, I think, an overarching theme us as a group are going to have for anybody watching this, and it's all about networking collaboration. I met Chris at a Pepperdine, basically a risk management workshop I was facilitating. We started talking, and that really established just kind of the foothold of building a relationship, understand, you know, security is a team sport. It takes the village to secure the village, so to speak. And it was more of, you know, the city's been doing a lot of great stuff. We saw the articles about cyber labs a few years back when the budget was initially approved. And it was more of kind of, I don't know if it was historical, but I'm not aware of LA City and LA County ever really partnering up from a cyber perspective, right? If there's a regional incident that happens in LA County, there's a really good chance it's going to affect LA City, all local jurisdictions, and vice versa. So the question really became, why are we not doing this already? Why are we not getting these other jurisdictions locally to start participating in, you know, in the spirit of a team sport, right? And we've had a lot of meetings, a lot of really good feedback. From Cyber Labs, we actually receive a lot of good threat intel. Sometimes it's in front of MSI, SAC, JRIC, and CISA, the different organizations that we receive feeds from. But, you know, we collectively analyze it internally within our SOC, and we start putting defenses in place, looking for IOCs as they kind of mature and modify, right? So it's eliminating that wall of transparency, especially on a cybersecurity perspective in government, is very important. A lot of things that we're doing, you know, LA County is the largest county in the nation, very big, very complex, right? Thinking about voting, Chris mentioned the city doesn't handle voting, LA County does, right? So within LA County, we have to support, we have over 100 spoken languages. So when you start looking at cybersecurity in the context of geopolitical events, things that are happening, right? It really changes the threat landscape. It's from department to department, it's completely different. It evolves. There's very similar commonalities with our threat landscape, but we can't just take a vendor's threat report and say, okay, this is it. We're going to create a playbook based on what they're saying. The reality is we have different KPIs, KRIs, and without collaborating with LA City and other organizations, we can't really define our playbook. We need the intel, we need to collaborate. We're all facing the same challenges, especially when you start tying this into budget and resources. In most cases, we don't have it, right? So how do we turn this into more of a team sport and take advantage of the resources we do have?
And Chris, I mean, any gaps here to fill in between, the stories that we heard from Jeff and Tim about how they sort of got plugged into this effort? I mean, how do you see LA Cyber Lab growing and sort of that collaboration continuing to advance?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, when I came into the role, I was in the mayor's office. Now I'm just an advisor to Cyber Lab, but as the mayor's office role, they tasked me with, I was lucky that I didn't have to work on protecting the networks and on a technical capacity, right? I was more about, spearheading the collaboration. And, when I kind of, as a student of government, the first thing I looked at, what kind of key services do we want to maintain for the city of Los Angeles outside of what the city does? So as I mentioned, the county was #1 on my list. I was like, I need to talk to them. So that Pepperdine event that Jeff mentioned, like once I saw him there, that was like the #1 thing I was there for. I was like, I need to talk to him. I need to get this relationship going. And like Jeff said, the relationship is really, really key. You can say all you want about, giving a cool pitch about Cyber Lab, it does X, Y, and Z. Me, Jeff, and the other CISO at the time, Ralph, we regularly met for coffee right outside of City Hall for a few weeks after that, just to start planning things. COVID interrupted the in-person meetings, but I thought that was really key, that again, that kind of relationship building. The other kind of big, stakeholders I was after from that more, what government services are really important perspective, the school districts. So I met regularly with the school district there, and then LA Metro, again, who provides a lot of public transit. And then I did my best to just pick off, smaller cities. Any chance that someone from Pasadena or Long Beach or Beverly Hills or, wherever, let them know that we're doing this collaboration and kind of bring everything into the fold. But the county and the city, I think, were the most key ones working together on it, because the city is just so big, has so many resources, and obviously pushing the Cyber Lab program. Just in terms of the future, I see this only becoming more important. The collaboration, obviously, we've accelerated our dependency on IT with the pandemic. LA has major events coming up. The Super Bowl we just passed by, but there was a lot of collaboration between the city, county, NFL, state, local feds there that showed a good example for future events. World Cup, Olympics, all coming up. So LA is going to be a huge target. The risk surface, the target surface is only expanding, and the threats are only expanding. We're looking at, again, Jeff touched on, there's geopolitical tensions now. There's ransomware games that might not only look for money, but also kind of edge on that hacktivist side. You see that with Conti and kind of their support of Russia, even though they kind of backtracked a little. But I can easily see a future where there's more of that. So, the risk is going to grow, the dependency is going to grow, so the need for collaboration is going to grow, because the funding is not going to necessarily grow, in parallel to the threat and the vulnerability.
And Chris, you just mentioned the Super Bowl and obviously the Olympics coming up as well. What are some of these what are some of these examples of how collaboration around cyber has played a huge role in these events? And Jeff, let's go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is obviously key. Big event security, it's completely different. It's a different animal. LA County security programs, it's maturing. It's a living process. But initial meetings, and Chris, I'd love to get your view on this as well with the NFL. It was very eye-opening, just everything that goes into big event security, right? Because one of the reoccurring themes from the NFL for Super Bowl was just the experience. And it wasn't necessarily the experience for the players, but it starts with the person that gets their tickets to the game. From being able to book to having, bus, rail system, I mean, you name it, available. There was just such a wide range of vectors that had to be considered and looked at. And all of these folks were brought into the table by the NFL, which we had a chance to really meet these other jurisdictions and understand how do their emergency operations centers work. I think a breakdown that was identified right out of the gate, and this is something I'm sure we're going to be collaborating with LA City on, probably through Cyber Labs, is sharing intelligence data, right? We were doing this across pretty much every local jurisdiction, including utilities, Edison, LADWP. Because in the event something happened in the stadium, that game had to go on. So what can we do to get in front of it to prevent it? LA County Sheriff's Department, they brought a lot of tech in where they could sniff out potential explosive devices that were not turned on. The dogs were able to actually, I don't recall what the terminology was, but they could basically sweep stadiums looking for anything placed. So you had that aspect. The physical aspect was one thing, and then even looking at it in the context of a SCADA system, right? The stadium security is very closed. So what happens, let's say it's 2-minute warning, fourth quarter, and the sprinklers system goes off. Potentially that's billions of dollars in play, and there's a huge regional effect to the economy. So it's, without collaboration, it comes back to, even in the private sector, an organization, I think, unless you've done big event security, is really prepared to secure the environment for it, because there's so much more that has to be taken into consideration. And from my perspective is, the Super Bowl was really the start of our playbook for the big events that Chris was talking about, World Cup and the Olympics.
And I want to go to Chris in a second, but Tim, I also want to bring you in. I mean, obviously, as the city CISO, you were super involved in the Super Bowl process. I mean, how did you see cyber collaboration really playing a role there?
Yeah, as a cybersecurity professional, we need to keep in mind that hackers and cyber criminals are also collaborating. So that's why even though we are collaborating, we need to make sure our collaboration is effective. All right. It's kind of like OODA loop, right? When you have a two-sided using the OODA loop, whoever closes the OODA loop fast win. From my observation, I think to be effective collaboration, we need 3 things. Number one is we need to have a clear mission, either ongoing collaboration or one-time event like Super Bowl collaboration. We need to have a clear mission or objectives, what we're trying to achieve. And number second is that we need to have a good governance structure, like how do we select the members, onboarding, membership, what do we share, how do we share, when do we share, that kind of governance structure. And then lastly, we need to have a very good collaboration platform. So either make machine to machine or human to human collaborating using the platform more effectively. Those are the key items to be for us to collaborate and cyber defense to counter attack the criminal coordinated attacks.
And Chris, your perspective here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add to the points that they just made. Tim just talked about, I think what Tim just talked about is the recipe for sustainable collaboration, right? Like we can do a lot of ad hoc stuff, we'll do this, we'll do that together, but that governance to kind of keep the legacy going, because the 3 of us might not be here when the Super Bowl's around. We might be in different positions, retired, who knows what, right? If we're lucky, right? So with that in mind, we need to build a foundation. We need to build the structures. We need to build the governance that what Tim said. We need to set the example. We need to say why it's important for it to carry on, because I think that's vital. Because a lot of things, a lot of great programs, a lot of great initiatives you always see, sometimes they're led by people, and once those people leave, they die out. So that's been kind of a critical thing here, and that was kind of led to the formation of a cyber lab. Rather than just saying LA will have a collaboration program, they really gave it identity. It was before I even came, but they really gave it identity. They really gave it something like, this is Cyber Lab, and to continue on the tradition. And then I forget my other point, but what was it? So, essentially, Jeff brought up that collaboration from the Super Bowl, how vital that is. The theme that you see running through all this, I think, is dependency, right? So there's a dependency on technology. That's one dependency, but there's also dependency on each other. And as I mentioned at the top of this call, our dependency on the county's dependency on us. But then you look at the Super Bowl, right? The NFL, for their game to go well, they had dependencies on LAX. They had dependencies on public transit. They had dependencies on, just traffic. They had a lot of live events in downtown LA, which was miles away from the actual stadium. They had dependencies on, the venues over there. So I think really just understanding and admitting and knowing these dependencies and knowing that we have them on each other, and then we need to collaborate to make sure that everything works well. It's similar to that supply chain in a way, right? It's just a different way to look at it. I want my vendors to be very secure, because if they're not, then what they're selling to me is laced with malware or who knows what. So I think that's a good theme that I'd want to press. The dependency on others is one of the reasons why this collaboration is so important.
Now to sort of wrap it all up here, we've got just a couple of minutes left, so we got to keep the answers super brief. But as we look out across the landscape, there are so many opportunities for folks to do this kind of work outside of Los Angeles. So in one sentence or so, what else can folks do? How can they learn from LA's example? How can they take it even further? And Jeff, I realize I asked three questions and asked for one sentence, but maybe you can do it. Jeff, you first.
It's definitely going to come back to building your partnerships with your local jurisdictions, with government. You know, there's transparency in cybersecurity, not so much, but it's about having those conversations on what are my pain points, what are your pain points, common understanding of, you know, what's our end goal, right? And how do we alleviate these pain points, not just for us, but for municipalities. Each jurisdiction is a little bit unique. But there's a lot of commonality, especially from a threat landscape perspective. Build their partnerships. Without our partnership with LA City, we wouldn't be on this call right now together. And there's a lot of good stuff coming from it. And there's, you know, I'm excited about the direction we're about to take it.
That was a little more than one sentence, but we'll allow it. We'll allow it. Tim, how about you? I mean, what else can leaders do? How can folks learn from LA's example, and how can they take it even further?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you make sure that you build trust among the members, and then trust members to the platform. And second is to make sure that the stuff that you are sharing are targeted and intelligent. So instead of dumping the IOC, make sure the IOC you are sharing are targeted and intelligent.
And Chris, bring it home here. Advice, how can folks learn from the example? How can they further it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Tim and Jeff said is point on and are on point. And I would even expand and say, there's, again, recognize the dependencies with others, but really you need, like, there needs to be just a wider shift in thinking. It's not the 1990s, it's not the 2010s, it's not even the 2000s. It's not the 2000s anymore, right? It's not about protecting your systems. It's about, you know, maintaining your operations. And again, dependency is important. You need to work with others. You only have so much funding. This is especially important for state and local. So I'd really keep that in mind. And I would point that at not just the IT administrators, but the elected officials, you know, the city managers. This is a public policy lane that should really be looked at, especially again, as our dependency on technology becomes so much more important. So I would keep that in mind and just don't think of it in the old ways, think of it in the new ways.
Jeff, Chris, Tim, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a great chat.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our audience, stay tuned for the next session.
Coming up next.
Joining us now is Matt Schneider, the VP for State, Local, and Education at Palo Alto Networks. Matt, thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
So Matt, you know, public sector entities are at a landmark moment. I mean, there's one-time funding coming in, and the threats are obviously continuing to explode. So from your perspective, how should leaders be breaking down how to spend some of that money?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, cyber is at the forefront of the conversation right now across the news and everything the leaders are working on. It really comes from our perspective into a few areas that we're seeing success and we're seeing the focus. You know, first is around visibility and looking at visibility from a different perspective, you know, comprehensive across the entire enterprise that now makes up state, local, and education. The second is around optimizing that infrastructure. So taking those investments we've made and getting them to the next level in terms of their ability to work together. And then third is really around this concept of actionable security. I got to stop just collecting data, and I have to ensure that I'm putting myself in a way to defend my enterprise.
So let's dive into those a little bit. You mentioned visibility. Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, how has visibility really changed for cyber leaders in government and education in recent years? And how do you see it changing going forward?
Yeah, it's coming in a couple ways. And the pandemic didn't make it any easier, if we're honest there. We had a couple trends going on. And then with the work from anywhere, you know, surge that we saw across the board, we now have an enterprise that no longer sits behind the traditional boundaries of visibility for us. when you add in the complexity and the adoption of cloud technologies, the modern enterprise for our government and education customers is very spread out. So as we look at visibility, it really comes into not just the visibility of what's coming in and out of the enterprise, but what my users are doing, where my data lives, and then what's the context of that together. So when we talk about visibility, it's combining those together, understanding those workloads in the cloud as they relate to that worker from anywhere, as back to your traditional enterprise, and what is the interaction and what is the engagement on that. For a lot of us, that's the foundation of zero trust, which obviously has been a buzzword of all buzzwords lately, but that is that foundation there with visibility first and foremost.
Well, let's talk for a second about zero trust. I mean, it is a buzzword, but buzzwords are often buzzwords, right? Because they're trending topics and they're huge in the minds of folks. So whether we're talking about visibility or just talking about general preparedness, I mean, zero trust is one of those dominating themes in what cybersecurity leaders are doing right now. What advice do you have for them when it comes to zero trust? How are you encouraging them to dive into the zero trust mindset?
Yeah, first and foremost, start with what you have, right? This isn't a throw the baby out with the bathwater. Understand what you have, understand those crown jewel applications that are first and foremost important for you, and then start thinking about how you eliminate the implicit trust. So the reality is we've built enterprises up inside of government that we treat a user differently when they're inside behind our traditional, guards, gates, and guns of the digital perimeter than we did when they worked from home or when they are in the cloud. We have to bring the same level of trust and lack of, eliminating that trust across the board. So when we start with those crown jewels, when we start with an understanding of those key applications, the users and the context, then we can start eliminating that trust. So we can say, yeah, this is behavior I trust. This is behavior I know, and we can truly be in an understanding of where we get there. You don't have to do the entire enterprise at once, but you do want to start with those most critical applications.
It's a really good point that you don't have to do it all at once. I think that's something that folks often maybe get a little overwhelmed with. So that's good advice. Let's go back to the three areas that you mentioned. Infrastructure is as a giant priority as the public sector continues to look at modernization. I mean, how are you advising folks to make sure they're making smart decisions about how that optimization happens?
The reality for any customer, but especially in the public sector space, is there is a tremendous amount of, for lack of a better word, technical debt that we've taken on. We've built solutions, we have legacy applications, we have these investments, and we don't have the luxury, even with the funding that's now available, to throw everything out and start from scratch. So we need to start by making our technologies work together. We need to start by taking the investments you've made in security, the investments you've made in infrastructure, and tying them back and forth with that work from anywhere approach, with that migration of the cloud. So tying back in and having our tools work, in a coordinated environment, so we can understand when we're seeing something in the cloud, what are the implications back to our traditional infrastructure? When I've made investments in one type of infrastructure technology, how can I make sure that works with other areas of technology? And then how can I get that collective context so that I'm making the right decisions for my user? Understanding that plan and where I'm going and working backwards is going to be critical, rather than just adding in new technologies without that understanding of vision and end state effectively.
You keep using the word context. I think it's a really important word in this context. And specifically, when we're talking about things like modernization, there's so much prioritization that leaders have to do. How do you work with them to make sure that they're prioritizing things, correctly when it comes to a cybersecurity context?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer, right? Let's be honest there. There's not a one size fits all. It's around the agency priorities. It's around the need to impact that citizen. Talked about those crown jewel applications earlier on. We have to start there. There are certain applications that as we're doing emergency responses, we're doing water and power and critical infrastructure that are forcing us to think in a different light than we have before, to say, how do I keep those up and running in light of the world events? The president recently tweeted about preparing for cyber attacks. That's something we haven't experienced before, and it's changing that mental priority for our agencies, for our institutions who are out there working together on this. With that, to get our hands around that context, it does come back to understanding our users. Who are those users that need to be accessing that data? Who are our users that need to be putting things in the cloud? What do they need to be accessing? How do I serve the citizen? How do I serve the resident in those capabilities? Really going back and examining what you have, it is foundational to that. And then what are the right technologies that protect those environments, and what are the right technologies that allow those users to continue to improve the services they're getting out of those environments.
And so Matt, all of this together, right? All of the pieces, the visibility, the infrastructure, zero trust, modernization, all of these things together really come to action, right? We need to do something in this moment. We have to take advantage of these opportunities in funding and these national, international crises that are bringing us here to do something in the space. So from your perspective, I mean, how does all of this come together to result in, as you said, actionable security for the public sector?
Yeah, we use the word context, but that is so critical, because the unfortunate reality in security is every time a new problem has popped up, a new technology has come in. Very rarely have those technologies worked comprehensively together. We're seeing technologies on the SOAR front. We're seeing technologies on data lake and gathering to start collecting that data and looking at different levels of decision making. The reality is one of the resources most lacking for our clients is people. So we have to start tying in the ability of machine learning. We have to start tying in the ability of artificial intelligence to take the redundant tasks off our users so they can focus on the most critical. So that in some cases is alerting a team to be able to say, I see a problem, let's go execute on it, versus just the historic logging that so often has been done in the public sector space. Other times we're going to actually move all the way to a pure automation perspective of, I have this problem and it's here. The other thing that's coming into the fold here is, I think many agencies, many institutions have realized, I can't do this alone. So while they might have great SOC teams, they might have great security analysts and security teams out there, making sure that we have a foundational element behind those users to understand when bad happens, and we have to prepare for bad to happen, that I have a plan to get back up and running. So whether that's leveraging industry partners, whether that's taking advantage of your peer organizations, agency to agency, city to state, state to state, we realize that we have to have people there to help you in that time of need. And that's really a conversation that some of the funding requirements have changed, as well as, when we got together, whether it's through recent conferences, you're hearing government for the first time really talk about, how are you doing this? How can we help each other? Where can we go? And that's about making it actionable and ensuring that we get through this together.
And when you're talking about things like emerging technologies, I mean, maybe they're not so emerging anymore, but automation is a good example. I mean, how are you convincing some of the more skeptical folks in government specifically, or even higher education, of their efficacy and of their value in this response?
Look, I'll be the first to admit, automation's been a dirty word for a while, right? Hey, I've identified a task I want to automate. Let's go spend the next year automating that task, which meant everything else didn't get addressed over the time. The reality is we're seeing agencies, we're seeing institutions start sharing how they're automating. They're putting playbooks out of how you take data from CISA, or you take data from another element and say, hey, when I get this, this is the playbook I run to do it. So you're starting to see peer-to-peer sharing inside of that. So that's really exciting, because we're looking at peers and saying, wow, we're solving these problems together, which is fantastic. The other thing is, because the technology is maturing, there is enough there to go tackle those, I don't want to say mundane because they're critically important, but problems like phishing. A modern enterprise spends a tremendous amount of remediation on phishing activities. We can just cut that down, and being able to talk to your peers about how they've introduced automation to cut down the examination and the remediation around phishing. Then there's a tangible, real example to go, okay, now I understand how I can take on the next one and the next one and the next one. Back to the themes we've been talking about, Jake, it's not all at once. You're not going to automate your entire security environment at once. How do you take those very repetitive, mundane tasks and quickly get them out by looking at your peers who've shared how they've done it and how they've been successful in continuing to elevate their infrastructure and their security profile as a result of that.
That's great. What a nice bow you put on it there. Matt, thanks so much for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you, Jake.
And stay tuned for our next session in just 1 second.
Coming up next.
Joining us now is Deborah Watson, resident CISO at Proofpoint. Deborah, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks, Jake. Glad to be here.
So, Deborah, the event is the Cybersecurity Modernization Summit. We're talking in the context of today's cyber landscape and world. I mean, from your perspective, when you look out across the public sector, how are you working with folks to build some of these best of class practices and tools when it comes to cyber?
That's a very good question. And, our customers define best of class different depending on who they are. Even within the public sector, best in class in education or best in class in government, whether it's state or local government, is going to be a little different. And it varies from state to state too. So if you think about, I'm in Texas. Texas has their own cybersecurity requirements that we use. And so when a governmental or somebody who's using those services organization is planning something, then they use those as their controls to measure their progress. Other organizations might use NIST or something else. And so when somebody says they want to be best in class, I usually talk about, well, do you know where you are right now? Before I recommend anything, I want to assess your state. In a lot of cases, they'll have an assessment. If not, then we talk through it. And so when you want best in class, it's not a best in class for somebody else, it's best in class for you.
It's a good point. Let's dive into the assessment piece a little bit there. So, I mean, what are the things you're looking for, first, right? What's that most important thing? If you have someone who's coming and you're like, oh my God, Deborah, what am I going to do? Here's this thing I'm working on. Where do you start? How does that assessment take shape?
Sure. So there's lots of talk right now in the public sector about having a security service edge. So different terminology for it depending on what you want, but the executive order has said that you need to work on having that approach. And so if you're thinking of that, you could go buy a product and you could put the solution in place and you could do what I call checkbox security, where you're trying to meet a compliance requirement. And you can say, okay, we did it, we're done, we meet the requirement. But at the end of the day, for something like that, you would need to step back a second and see what those solutions, whether it's that or any other solution, what it's relying upon. And it could be just MFA you're implementing. But in order to implement something like that, the tool should be the secondary concern. The first concern is, what is your process? What about your people? How are you going to train them? And so stepping back and making sure your foundational things are in place. A solution like MFA or SASE is not going to be any good if you don't have solid foundation. Your identity management has to be in order, because if that's not, then you're building your house on a foundation of sand and it's going to collapse.
And so I think when we're talking about this, we're really talking about, you mentioned compliance, and I think that's a good point, but like compliance versus just overall security strategy. I mean, how would you recommend folks prioritize and make some of those decisions?
Well, it's not always up to the particular organization. It should, whether you're doing compliance or security or whatever you're doing, it's got to be a balance. And everything you do should be risk-based decisions. And even when it comes to compliance, if there's an impact from not meeting compliance, whether it's a fine, a legal and regulatory fine, all of your decisions you need to make risk-based decisions. And hopefully you're balancing your compliance needs with your security needs, because they should be aligned. To that point, though, you could be compliant and still not truly meet security. So what I mean by that is, let's just talk about email security for a second. The requirement for email security is extremely minimal from a compliance perspective. You have, an email security gateway in place. It checks X box, this box, that box. there's nothing in the compliance that says what the efficacy has to be, or automated processes versus manual processes. So you have to think through the people, process, and technology, and how does it actually provide value to your organization, and not just you check the box. You want it to actually do what you need it to do based on your risk appetite.
And it's sort of, you bring up a good point about the risk appetite, because I think it also brings up a question of proactive and reactive, right? It just like compliance and the overall security approach, there is a balance there as well. I mean, for some of these organizations that have been maybe in a more compliance mindset or a more reactive mindset when it comes to cyber, shifting to one that's a little bit more proactive, maybe not an easy change. How are you working with some folks to make something like that happen?
So I think it's a matter of looking, if we talk about the assessment part, you want to use some type of maturity model. NIST CSF is quite common in the public sector space. As a matter of fact, even my not private sector customers using NIST CSF a lot. And so you can do an assessment, understand the level of maturity. And I'm talking about not give yourself a checkbox if only 50%, you have it, but it only applies to 50% of the organization. Clearly at that point, you've got too many exceptions and you don't truly have the coverage. But that's the whole point of the assessment, right? Is to understand where you are and identify your gaps. And so once you do that, you need to prioritize the foundational items first. And then, of course, those other things that maybe enable your organization to do what they need to do. Because COVID provided a great reference for making things available online. A lot of people had to quickly put things in place. And when they did that, a lot of them skipped their normal processes to assess and validate and make sure they crossed their T's and I's. So an assessment might identify those gaps, and then you would determine how to address them, create a plan. And the POEM process, I think, is also used a lot to make sure that you've got your plans in place and that you're tracking and you've got deadlines. And an exception is not there forever. It's intended to be dealt with. And the maturity in the assessment helps you prioritize, what your low-hanging fruit is, and then your longer-term plans.
I want to switch gears just a little bit, but sort of keep the context of everything we've been talking about so far in mind. Common theme in our conversations today at the summit has really been this influx of infrastructure dollars and the cyber grants coming from CISA for state and local governments. I mean, when you're talking to folks across the community, how are you advising them to spend that money? You talk about prioritization. How are you advising them to prioritize how to spend that? So
obviously that money comes with some requirements. You can't just spend it on whatever you want, okay? I think that the foundation, a lot of it is really focused on making sure your foundation is in a working place. People usually think of the money. I usually point back to the processes. Sometimes the money's better spent on some consulting, perhaps. I mean, keep in mind, Proofpoint's not a consulting company. That's not what we do. But I'm not talking about buying stuff from Proofpoint. I'm talking about, what do you need? And so you need that people and process to be in place, because if you could go and buy all the tools, but if you don't have processes to implement them, it's not going to help you. And so I think that the knowing how to spend that money is, think about it from a pain point perspective. What are the biggest things that are causing you an issue? And if that is the efficacy of how well maybe your email security is working, or if you've got an insider threat issue, you're worried about, you've got these threat actors, maybe they're state actors coming after you, you want them to have the best in class, as you guys mentioned, then you need to make sure that while you check the box on email security, that you have the best in breed, and that the efficacy is as high as you can possibly get it. You're following best practices, because you can also have best in breed, not follow best practices, and you still didn't do what you intended to do. You're not getting the value you wanted.
Best in breed, best in class, best practices, all coming together to make it happen. Right. Speaking of everything coming together, I mean, all of this that we're talking about, right? When we're talking about the approaches to cyber, we're talking about reactive, proactive, we're talking about compliance, security, all of this comes together and we're really talking about elevating the maturity level of cyber operations across the public sector. And it's a continuing journey, right? It's not an end state. It's not there's no end mark that says, hey, we're done, we did it. Where do you see that maturity going in the near future?
Well, I think that it is an evolving threat landscape. It changes. I mean, a year ago, we always look out for threat actors in public sector, but as you can imagine, with the sensitivity of what we've got in the geopolitical arena right now, our senses are a little more heightened. We're looking at things a little differently. And so while we need to be able to react when things change like they are right now because of the geopolitical situation, we also need to make sure that we are trying to proactively look and determine how to respond. And so if we can set up some processes, continuous audit and monitoring is a very big topic right now. And trying to figure out how that best works in your organization will help slowly transition you from being a reactive, something happened and now you've got to deal with the malware or the fact that this threat actor has targeted you. If you can start watching before the threat actor gets too far, you will notice that the threat intelligence warned you that it was going to happen. But most people, because there's so many resource issues, they struggle with that. And so before you can get there, you have to have a plan. And it may take you 2 years, but if you don't make the plan, it'll never happen. You can't transition. So it's okay if it takes a while. You just have to have a plan and start working on it.
That's great. That's great. Great point there. One more question for you, Deborah, to sort of wrap it up. What is your favorite cyber buzzword that actually means more than it sounds like it means?
Cloud. What's in the cloud? A cloud has always amused me because before we ever talked about things being in the cloud, which, they make fun of this on TV shows and stuff. What's the cloud? I don't know where my data is. It's in the cloud. But most people, most companies and organizations had their HR data in the cloud before it was ever even called the cloud. All it meant, and the same thing with backup. We've done offsite backups, and offsite had, vendor third parties that we use their solutions, which is in the cloud, right? So I think that sometimes when a term seems to resonate more, we tweak it to make it sound better. So cloud, it's a good one. I could see us calling it new things next, but buzzwords, right?
Now I know who to call for my next cloud conversation. Deborah, thank you so much for being here. It's been great chatting with you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Jake.
And we have many more great sessions coming for you next. Stay tuned.
Coming up next.
Hi again, I'm Benjamin Freed, the technology editor at StateScoop. I'm joined now by three cybersecurity leaders in government: Jason Cavendish, the Deputy Chief Security Officer for the state of Michigan; Nancy Ranasek, the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Texas; and Jeff Phillips, the Vice President of Public Sector at Yubico. So I think we have a lot of ground to cover in talking about what states are doing to secure their networks and to secure their environments. I actually want to start by talking about something that's a recent trend in state government cybersecurity: the increased attention towards certifying vendors, especially cloud vendors. There are a number of different models. I know Jason and Nancy, you've both been developing your own programs, and you're also dealing with something like the new state ramp program. So I want to give everybody a chance to start out by talking about, Jason and Nancy, what are you doing to certify the security and reliability of your vendors? And then Jeff, let's hear about what your perspective is on that from Yubico. Jason, do you want to start off?
Sure. So, a huge part of this for the state of Michigan is not just the existence of our existing accreditation process, but how it applies to cloud and external vendors. The first step for us is to understand how external entities have already assessed themselves and what their security posture is. And so part of that then is FedRAMP, obviously, is a good level benchmark to start with, but then so are SOC 2 Type 2 reports and now state ramps. So what we want to do with those though is once we know that a vendor or an external partner has a security posture established, we need to kind of figure out what is the shared responsibility model for the consumer provider relationship. And the consumer portion of that becomes very important from the perspective of it's not good enough just to say, well, I'm in a FedRAMP environment, like say AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure, but how did I configure my responsibilities in that environment to ensure that I remain secure? And I think that's really one of the key focus points for not only our internal accreditation process, but how we utilize the other external processes such as FedRAMP, StateRAMP, and SOC 2 Type 2 reports.
Yeah. And Nancy, how about you? You've got the TexRAMP program going.
We're very fortunate that our legislature and our governor are very cyber aware and very concerned about the security of the citizen data that we hold. So Senate Bill 475 that was passed this last session mandated that we set up a RAMP program, which we refer to as TexRAMP. We already automatically accept FedRAMP and StateRAMP under the TexRAMP certification, but if a vendor wants to go just through us, they can do that. And what we're asking is that vendors have the same security controls that we require of our state agencies. So it's just asking that they secure our data in the same manner that we expect state agencies to secure data. In addition, we also have a public cloud manager that is run out of our shared technology services program, so that as people who participate in that program move to the cloud, we have a provider that helps make sure that those configurations that Jason talked about are set up properly at the start, so that we're also taking into account the configurations in addition to the security controls that the vendors have in place, the cloud vendors.
So Jeff, from your perspective, as a partner of federal, state, and government, the overall public sector, where do you see this increased focus on vendor security coming in?
Yeah, so to my esteemed colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And thank you for the great work that you're doing at your individual states for our security. To answer the question, what everyone was alluding to is really, thank goodness for NIST at the Department of Commerce, federal, because they've established the NIST security controls that everybody's referencing, whether it be SOC, SOC is their version of the NIST 800-53 security controls. Now, here's the problem with all that. There's thousands of them. So that's why the state, each individual, and Nancy can speak to this, you have to literally have a lot of people to divide that workload to understand those security controls are adhered to for best practices. So what I've seen in the course of my 20 plus years, now I'm dating myself, is more and more centralized collaboration from both federal, state, and even local. And it all has started with, we've all accepted these base standards from NIST for our security controls. That's where the ramp's coming from. Now that everyone's going to have a different version of the security control, the security controls that matter to them and their organizations. But we have this basic foundation that we've never really had previously. Everyone was left to go discover it and work it out on their own. So we at Yubico spend our time working with the identity components as it relates to within the security controls and basically empowering tougher practices, or more challenge-based questions and things along those lines to help identity be secure within those control mechanisms.
I'm glad you brought up identity, because I did want to ask next where zero trust, the push towards zero trust, fits into everything these days. Obviously, we've got at the federal level, there's a big push for the government to adopt zero trust security. I know it's increasingly popular topic at the state level too. So I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on where we are in kind of the zero trust process, and what the next steps are going to be.
Yeah, sure, I can go. So for Michigan and like many other organizations, I think, the pandemic kind of threw us into a zero trust trial by fire. And we all had to very quickly figure out what are we going to do with our distributed workforce and decentralized application processing, and how do we, ensure that we can continue to maintain the systems and services that our states are trying to offer to our citizenry. And so with that, we, of course, as many others did, we identified some gaps to how we were able to provide those services, and we tried to figure out what's the most effective way to close those. And using NIST SP 800-207, which is the kind of zero trust architecture framework from NIST, we started to look into a zero trust maturity assessment. We actually contracted for a third party to come in and help us evaluate what we were doing well already, and where our real gaps were across what we defined as 8 different capability contexts and 139 different requirements for our zero trust maturity. And that has resulted in about 27 potential projects that we're now aligning with other existing internal projects to determine what's got the highest priority, what's going to give us the most, gap closure for our next steps. And then, what things do we already have in flight that are listed in these projects that were identified by our assessment partner to continue to improve the systems and access control that we're providing to our agencies and systems. Michigan's a centralized IT space, so we in the executive branch of government provides IT services for all the other executive branch agencies. So we have that core context that we're working through. So one of the things that we're doing with that is trying to figure out how do we take those capabilities and requirements that I mentioned and provide the overarching governance for things like identity and devices and networks and applications and the data that they access, so that we can continue to do a better job of analyzing how those accesses are being made at a granular level and automating those processes.
Right. So Michigan obviously, as Jason said, very, very centralized. Texas, very decentralized, very federated. Nancy, where does the zero trust conversation fit into to your organization and the services you're providing?
Oh, we were very fortunate. The legislature appropriated us funding 2 sessions ago and then continued it this past session for multi-factor. So that's one of our big pushes, is multi-factor authentication and providing those services to the agencies as they bring their applications on. We have recently adopted NIST 853 Rev 5. And so we're just continuing to push the boundaries. Being federated, I don't really have any control about what the agencies do except for those standards. And so over time, we're just going to continue to push those standards forward, give them time to get the funding and then put the technology in place before we say, yes, this is it, so that the auditors don't come in and kill them right immediately. But that's the way we're approaching it, is just kind of ramping up the standards over time so that they have to meet those.
And Jeff, I mean, this is obviously a huge, this is a core topic for Yubico. Where do you see the zero trust journey at, and what do you think the next phases of that are going to be?
Well, it was incredible to hear Jason just name all the pillars of zero trust, right? I mean, the hardest part is the education that we're all having to go through right now, and the prioritization. And then Nancy came to what's near and dear to our heart over at Yubico, which is MFA. So the number one thing that we're spending a lot of time with at our organization is education. And the education is not all MFAs are created equal. So then you have to go through the risk assessment of, high value assets or high value data, what you can use, what you can't use. There's a new term that the OMB from the administration is using called phishing resistant. So we're spending a lot of time defining and helping people understand phishing resistant. What does that mean to everybody today, for the listeners or people watching it? It's not good enough to get a 6-digit PIN anymore to your phone as an acceptable MFA. means you have to have some hardened phishing resistant, and we Yubico have that phishing resistant capability. So we find ourselves extremely busy these days. So there is the assessment that has to go on the high value assets prioritization, and MFA is a quick win for everybody as it relates to identity pillar, because it's the front door to your network and or applications.
Yeah. So this is kind of going to be a lightning round question, and hopefully we can we can do the way. But I did want to mention something that was in the news recently. We just heard a couple weeks ago from Mandiant some intelligence that a Chinese linked hacking group has been snooping around state government networks through a series of some well-known and less well-known exploits, Log4j, but then also some vulnerabilities in some third-party software. When something like this comes up, what are your thoughts as CISOs, as cybersecurity practitioners, and what are the steps that what's the response that you take when you hear about this?
Okay, I'll go. I think these headline grabbing events are really important educational tools. They demonstrate that cyber attacks are real and that they really do affect citizens' lives on a daily basis. For Michigan, one of the things that we're doing to try to combat them is kind of in line with our zero trust architecture, and that is development, security, and operations, DevSecOps, and emboldening and increasing that kind of standardization and culture in our environments. And what that's doing for us is it's helping give us more of a standardization across how do we manage source code, how do we build and deploy artifacts from that source code, how do we do static application security testing, how do we do source code composition analysis, all of which gives us the ability for things like we were talking about, the Chinese linked APT41 and their association with Log4j and .NET. It allows us to better understand our software bill of materials and actually be able to see where our risk is and address it more quickly. And so those are some of the really important things that we're doing. From a citizen perspective, we've also deployed an application called the Michigan Secure app, which helps them in their mobile lives to be able to identify, risks that they're directly facing from some of these attacks. So giving them awareness where they live and their mobile devices and the things they love. And then just one quick shout out to the FBI and DHS for the recent movie that they released called Made in Beijing, which really helps also bring home and enlightens us on what China and other nation state organizations are doing against us.
Yeah, Nancy?
I want to echo what Jason said. And in addition, we're continually making sure that we have the capability to go back and see what's happening through our logs. So that log analysis is very important, and having the ability to look back is very important as well. We have set up a number of teams now to help mitigate and respond to such activity, and we take it very seriously. We're at heightened alert now all the time because of these significant threats.
And Jeff, I'll let you close it out. What do you think?
So we don't have enough time for what I think, but I'll kidding aside. This is why we talked about zero trust. This is why we talked about the ramp, whether it's text ramp or whether it's state ramp or whether it's Fed ramp. These are all here because of, this is my personal opinion, but I blame the cloud for everything. And this is why I say that. Because a bad actor can spin up a session and have access to enterprise type capabilities to go and, try to do a denial of service or try to go and do, identity theft and things along those lines as it relates to user passwords. And we have to, as a nation, and even as your best practices, get rid of username and password as your only way to authenticate. My kids are in college and I get calls from them all the time about their social stuff getting hacked. And I thank goodness they're finally using my company's product, YubiKey, to do so. But I'm telling you, and here's the deal. You go to work, you get whatever security mechanism you have at work. That's not good enough. You have to make sure you're taking care of your home as well so that you have the 360 coverage. This is here. This isn't going to get any easier until we all practice best hygiene. And you can really start early from the user and the password, getting rid of it out of your mindset. And to my esteemed colleagues, they are way ahead of a lot of other organizations and just the zero trust and the ramp capability, because that's going to help eliminate and making us all secure and safe, both at home and in our jobs.
Yeah. Well, thank you all again for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in only about 15 minutes, and I think we could talk much longer for about any of these topics. But thank you all again for joining, and I'm sure we'll be talking about all of this a lot more.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck and continue with your mission there. Take care.
Here with us now is Chris Novak, the Director of Cyber Threat and Intelligence at Verizon. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Chris, ransomware is in the news seemingly every single day nowadays for the public sector. When you're talking to folks in government or higher ed, how are you advising them on their threat intelligence journey, and where should they get started?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you said it's a journey, because that's one of the things that I always comment on as it relates to whether it be ransomware or just cybersecurity in general, is that there's really kind of a journey or a spectrum to it in terms of everybody is at a different place. Everybody has a different goal of where it is they're trying to go to or get to ultimately. And then obviously the other thing I often say is that it's kind of funny in the sense that it's a journey that really kind of never ends. And I don't mean that in an ominous way, but more of, the landscape is constantly changing. So if your goal is to get to, this level of security or that level of security, that may be great for today, but tomorrow, next week, next year, the threat landscape changes. And so obviously you need to evolve with that. So, when I'm talking to organizations as it relates to, what it is that they're doing for ransomware, a key piece of that is understanding what type of ransomware are they preparing for and how plugged in are they to understanding the way that that has changed over the years, right? The early days of ransomware we saw was really just about locking up your system. And now there's been multiple evolutions of that ransomware over time. It used to be you could crack it. Now it's fairly robust, and we're also seeing situations where the ransomware actually leads to things like data exfiltration or publication of your sensitive data. So kind of being prepared for and having playbooks for that entire collection of different types of ransomwares that you may encounter is obviously very important.
And when it comes to the threat intelligence piece of this puzzle, how should these leaders, again, government and higher education, how should they prioritize intelligence over the other pressing focus areas on a given day?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And so, one of the first things I always tell everybody is before you do anything else, make sure you have the fundamentals, the foundational building blocks of cybersecurity in place. If you try to skip over that to do more sophisticated or fancier things, you're going to end up getting beaten up by a threat actor who just comes right in the front door because you left it unlocked and wide open. But assuming you've got the fundamentals and the foundational items in place, threat intelligence is probably one of the next key things that I'm usually advising organizations on what they should be doing. And the importance of it is situational awareness. Going back to the earlier comments around ransomware, the more you can know about what's happening, the better you can prepare your defenses and your protection, your mitigation, or, if it gets past that, your ability to then detect, respond, and mitigate that. Threat intelligence plays a critical role in having that information readily at your fingertips. We talk about what's happening on the geopolitical stage right now between Russia and Ukraine. Everybody's asking me what it is that we're seeing. I often say that, when you look at Verizon, we own and operate a big portion of the internet backbone, right? We typically say that is the battleground in which these cyber attacks take place, whether it's ransomware or anything else. It could be disruption of an OT environment and an energy utility grid. having that tie-in from a threat intelligence perspective, what I say is typically you want to kind of have it be like machine to machine type of communication, a feed, if you will, where then you can actually understand what's happening real time as we or others see it, right? So I'll give you for example, when my team goes out and we do a breach investigation, whether it's, related to something in the geopolitical landscape, or maybe it's something, more mundane. The moment we see something that a threat actor has done, the moment we've seen a piece of malware, the IOCs or the indicators of compromise, the TTPs, all of that goes into our intelligence feed. And the very same feed that we use to protect Verizon and all of our assets also then goes into that feed that we then look to stream out to customers so that they can then have that situational awareness and immediately detect on that, right? So if we see that IOC, it goes out in our feed, it goes into your system, you can then see, hey, wait a minute, someone is knocking on our door with this piece of malicious malware. The fact that we know it means we can block it before it has an opportunity to execute. And, if it's ransomware, prevent the potential for it encrypting our systems.
And I mean, another big piece of this puzzle really is on the assessments piece, right? Assessing what's going on at any given moment, assessing what happened at any given moment. So how do you see these leaders that we're talking about really approaching assessments on that journey that we're talking about?
Sure. Yeah. So when I look at assessments, there's a variety of different ways in which organizations can tackle that. The one thing that I typically start with is, have you done something like a basic cyber risk assessment, something that gauges your maturity against, say, a benchmark standard or framework? Then the next thing, especially with what's going on in the world today, I'm encouraging everybody to look at what they're doing around things like penetration testing. Those types of assessments are critically important. At the end of the day, if you look back at things like our data breach investigations report, we point out that a lot of the attacks start with something opportunistic. They start with something generally easy to exploit. Now, that's not necessarily always the things that make for great TV and movies, but the fact of the matter is it's where we see the bulk of these activities starting. And so what I encourage organizations to do is get out there, do that penetration testing on a regular basis, because if you can find where those opportunistic exploits or vulnerabilities may exist at your perimeter or in your environment, it increases the likelihood that you can address them and mitigate them before they actually can become something that a threat actor can exploit. And you can avoid having to deal with, say, the incident response and the remediation altogether.
So when we're talking about this, the threat intelligence journey or the cyber maturity journey, I mean, what are some of the other big pieces in your mind that, say I'm a CISO of a county or a city or maybe even with a smaller team, what are some of the other big pieces of that cyber maturity puzzle that I might be missing that I need to work on right now?
Sure. So I would point out two things. One is, and this is kind of a soapbox item for me, and it has been for decades, and that is understanding your asset inventory. It is probably one of the most boring and mundane tasks in cybersecurity, but you would be shocked how often we go in and we do an incident response engagement. We help an organization try to figure out what has happened, and usually the biggest puzzle piece is not necessarily always figuring out what the threat actor did, but actually sometimes it's trying to figure out what the victim's environment actually looks like. Because if we're trying to figure out what they touched, how they manipulated it, what they stole, you need to have a really good starting point, a blueprint of that environment to work off of. And a lot of times we find organizations struggle to have a really good asset inventory. And so if you don't know what assets you have, you struggle to then ensure that you've got security wrapped around them. You struggle to ensure that you're monitoring them appropriately. And then obviously, if you need to do incident response, it's important to understand where those assets are and what role they play. So that's one. And then the other piece would be incident response. A lot of organizations still today look at incident response as something that, hey, when something happens, I will find someone to help me, or I've got a great incident response team. What I always tell everybody is, look, train your people to be the best they possibly can be. Get them all the resources, technology, and tools you can possibly, afford in order to make that successful. But then also have a backup, or even a secondary backup, to be able to say, look, if something happens, if this incident grows to a level beyond what we can handle, or maybe we get faced with multiple incidents at the same time, that also happens, it may exceed the capacity of what your team can handle. Having a secondary or a tertiary organization on retainer to be able to quickly drop in the moment you have that need that can go a long way. I find a lot of organizations also struggle with, in today's day and age, the cyber talent pool is incredibly tight. It's incredibly hard to find people and keep people. And then you still have to go through all the motions of, training them and hopefully retaining them. So, having that secondary and tertiary backup goes a long way in terms of peace of mind and knowing that, when something happens, you've got people you can call on that know the environment and can help you respond.
Let's stay on the thread of incident response for a second, because I think some of the points you're making are super interesting. I mean, if leaders embrace the philosophy that you're talking about of really including incident response in that strategic planning, in that strategy for response, what does that approach mean for them and for their cyber operations long term?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it means you've got tighter control of that incident landscape end to end, right? So from the moment you detect something to the moment you are doing response and hopefully remediation and recovery, you can kind of tie all those linkages together. One of the things that we frequently encourage organizations to do and participate in a lot ourselves is things like breach simulations and tabletop exercises, where it allows you to actually test a lot of what it is that your team might face in the course of an incident. So, if you look at it, from the technical level, where maybe you'd say, look, if a ransomware event happened, what playbook would you follow and what steps would you execute? And let's go through those motions, right? Let's actually exercise that and see how it fares. And then all of that goes onto an executive level simulation or tabletop, if you will, where you can say, look, the technical folks, they know the buttons to press, the steps to follow, the systems to rebuild, or however it is they might approach that. But are the executives plugged in and aware of what their roles may need to be? Because a lot of times it's not always the difficult technical task of install this software, click this button, or run that script. Sometimes the biggest and most difficult thing is we need to take something offline, or we need to make a public statement, or we need to adversely impact some part of our operations. And that may not be a hard technical button to click, if you will. It may be a very difficult executive decision to make. And there could be, ongoing long-term or collateral damage implications of that decision. And it's important that the executives are read into that playbook and that simulation or those exercises, so that they're not surprised with having to make a big decision like that. And typically, we talked about ransomware earlier. The timeline in which those attacks take place are very fast. Typically you're looking at infection to ransomware demand to possibly system wiping. Maybe you're looking at 48 hours, 72 hours. So if you hit up the executive team with having to make a critical decision about your ongoing operations, and you tell them, hey, this came in Friday night, we need to have an answer on what we're doing, yay or nay, by Sunday morning, that may not necessarily give them a lot of time, especially if it's not a circumstance that they've been prepared for.
Chris, so many more directions we can go with this, but that's all the time we have for now. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jake.
And to the audience, stay tuned for more.
Coming up next.
Brian Dennis, Principal Technologist for Public Sector at Akamai Technologies, is joining us now. Brian, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Jake. Thank you for having me.
So, Brian, we're at the Cybersecurity Modernization Summit, but let's focus in for a second on the modernization side of the puzzle. When it comes to modernizing cybersecurity, I mean, how are you helping the public sector do that?
So when we think about modernization, it's an interesting time right now in cybersecurity, because there's a lot of trial and error that's been going on in cybersecurity over the last real couple of decades, honestly. And something that we tried several years ago was the concepts surrounding segmentation. Segmentation is really this idea about taking your network and really just going down as far as you possibly can to make sure that your network is protected from lateral movement in and out. And what we found a few years ago was the concepts surrounding segmentation were expensive. They were bulky. It took a long time to implement. And then there was a lot of really manpower management that had to go into it. And what we're finding out now with a couple of unique items that are out on the marketplace is that segmentation is really growing more into a software-based approach, which allows organizations to begin thinking about what they can do to protect themselves. Really, the biggest threat right now is ransomware. Protecting themselves from ransomware utilizing the concepts around a software-based approach to segmentation. And that's what gets me really excited these days, because what we can do is understand that there is no perfect system out there. We are going to have attacks that will continue to come in, but if we can stop them before they have the chance to move anywhere else within the network, then we have won. And that's what I'm really getting excited about these days when it comes to modernization, is taking ideas that we've tried in the past and redeploying them into systems that can actually work for us.
You know, and I think it's a good point. You talk about ransomware. You talk about sort of the threat that presents right now in this current moment. Another big challenge for folks is that these offices, these IT offices, these security offices are perennially understaffed. Right. I mean, what advice do you have for some of these leaders to manage that challenge and to still work on some of the topics that you're talking about, but do it, you know, with a limited staff?
Right, especially within the public sector right now, we are seeing a huge gap in the hiring process. The private sector is out there scooping up as many cybersecurity professionals as they possibly can, and the public sector, who will always have budget issues and just full-time employee issues, they're having a hard time keeping up. And so what we're really pushing our cybersecurity leaders in the public sector to do is to start thinking about how to do more with less. And that's what we're really focused on, is utilizing every dollar you possibly can in investment strategies to make sure that you're making your system as impenetrable as possible, and doing it with as few people as possible. And so taking advantage of some of the updates and some of the products that are out there on the market right now can really assist a cybersecurity team in making the most of their manpower as possible. I've had the opportunity to work with organizations where, in fact, I worked with an organization that had 15,000 employees and about 27,000 different customers that they were serving. And they had one person working in cybersecurity, and that one person was overwhelmed. And they were utilizing old technologies and old techniques. And so whatever they can do to improve that and to make sure that they keep that one person, because that's the big issue right now, is we have a lot of attrition moving through the cybersecurity community. And so what can we do to make sure that our employees are happy and sticking around and want to be a part of our team as we move forward? And that, modernizing our systems and our networks right now can really help reduce the stress that is falling upon our cybersecurity professionals. I worked in university systems for quite a while, and we actually studied what's going on within cybersecurity manpower, the labor force, and it is one of the most high stress jobs when you know that you potentially are responsible for an entire organization's safety, and you have people attacking you 365 days a year who only have to be lucky once, and you have to be lucky all the time. There's a lot of stress that's included in that. And so we want to make sure that we can keep our employees, really keep the pressure off of them by utilizing the technologies that we have at our fingertips.
You talk about doing more with less, and that's not going away anytime soon. However, there's a little bit more right now in this given moment. Infrastructure money is on the table. I mean, when you're talking to these folks across the public sector, how should state and local government and higher education use some of that money to supplement some of these workforce challenges?
Right. And so, there are definitely infrastructure dollars that are sitting out there and will be available to be used by a lot of our organizations. And so what I'm pressuring them to start thinking about is, instead of going out and taking these dollars to build physical structures, to really invest in new offices and racks and racks and racks of new servers, what can you do to make sure that your organization is going to be able to keep up with the times? And so understanding that you have got today to start building a strategy that relies less on the people aspect of it, because those people are hard to come by. I know right now CyberSeek says that, I live here in the state of Wisconsin, we have 6,000 open jobs in cybersecurity. That's only we're thinking it's probably going to double within the next year. So nationwide, we're going to be sitting at over 1 million open jobs in cybersecurity. And if we don't invest in the strategy, specifically that planning side about what can we do to keep our systems up to date and modernized, we're going to fall behind, and we have been. And so thinking about what can you do as a software-based approach to really start thinking, how am I going to leverage every dollar I have to make sure it's best spent, not just today, but for tomorrow. Infrastructure dollars will not be here forever. And so make the most of them now. Make it an investment as opposed to a one-time fix. And that's what I'm really hoping people will do.
You talked earlier about segmentation, and that was something that was present in the the memos and the orders coming from the White House on zero trust last year, and it's something that the president has been vocal about, his staff has been vocal about as well. And while those orders and memos don't necessarily apply to state and local governments, I mean, from your perspective, how should SLED approach some of the pieces that are included in those?
Well, when we start thinking about, when the White House comes out, they did last summer in a memo in June, they had 5 tips that organizations specifically within critical infrastructure can start doing right now to protect themselves. And number 5 on that list was segmentation. That took a lot of people by surprise, because what we're seeing is segmentation, what's old is new again. And so really thinking when organizations, even if you're not necessarily considered a part of that critical infrastructure, but you have to continue to really up your game and keep yourself safe. Segmentation is a great way to do that. And so understanding that it not only offers the opportunity to do something like stop ransomware in its tracks, you can also get visibility within your network that you just never had before. And so we've had opportunities to work with organizations that never knew exactly what systems were connected to what systems within their own networks. And creating a segmentation software-based approach gives you that immediate visibility. So you can begin understanding, why is this computer even speaking to this other one? And so understanding how to stop those lateral communications, that is going to really put an end to the big worry and that big fear within our SLED community about something like a ransomware attack, or having to deal with something like Log4j, like we were all dealing with just in December, and understanding that there is another issue that's on the horizon, and how do we approach it with a policy and procedure that puts us ahead of the game instead of trying to keep up with it.
And so let's sort of pull all of this together, right? We've talked about some more technical things like segmentation. We've talked about some of the workforce and funding challenges that these offices face. But what can the leaders who are tuning into this right now, what can they do to create a path forward for their cyber modernization journey? And what does that look like for them long term?
I am a great big fan of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, utilizing those 5 key elements of identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. And so our SLED organizations right now really need to start thinking about that. What are they doing to identify problems within their system, to identify networks and how they're connecting to one another? What are they doing to protect those, obviously? How is your system protected, and is it relatively protected compared to what's out there on the market? Then really moving into that detection piece. We know that right now the average cyber attack is rolling around in a system for 240 days before it's actually detected. And so, it's not a question anymore of if you'll ever have an attack come into your system, it's when. And how do you detect it? And then how do you properly respond? That response piece is something that a lot of our organizations are missing out. They don't plan on respond and recover. And so if you don't have a plan in place about how will you actively respond to a threat, and then most importantly, how will you recover from that threat, you're going to have issues that are going to be just incomprehensible. We have got to begin thinking into the future as far as when an attack comes in, what do we do? Because they're going to continue to come. When we look at right now what's going on with world events across the globe, we understand that cyber attacks most likely will begin growing. Unfortunately, in the near future, we can probably expect some coming relatively quickly. And so we've got to start planning today, yesterday. We really need to start thinking about what can we do to keep our organization safe. And most importantly, how do we recover and keep our brand intact? I know that cybersecurity within SLED, you're not really necessarily thinking about brand and marketing, but it is something that you've got to consider. And so when an attack comes through your doors, at some point, somebody is going to take notice, and you want to make sure that your organization is prepared to handle those communications that are going to have to go out to say what happened, how did we respond, and how are we planning to recover, and how quickly will it take us to recover.
Great note to end on, Brian. Thank you so much for being here. Amazing perspectives today.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.
And we have more great sessions like this one lined up for you today. Stay tuned.
We're chatting with Kim Milford, Executive Director of REN ISAC. Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
So let's get started. 2022 thus far continues to present unique and evolving cybersecurity threats. Maybe we thought we'd have a break. No, absolutely not. Kim, could you discuss some of the short-term priorities for higher education cybersecurity teams and maybe some of the remaining challenges from last year that are still a priority?
Great question, Emily. Thank you. A lot of the challenges are actually carry forward from last year and the year before and many years before that. We know that the threats stay the same, that if they're effective, the criminals will keep using them. So phishing still a huge initial input vector for bad actors in cybersecurity. And then along with that, we see ransomware, the same sorts of things that we've seen for years. Now, ransomware continues to evolve and ramp up and really put pressure because it creates denial of service environments. It creates privacy risks. So, I would say maybe becoming a bigger deal, if there is such a thing, but really just still challenging for everyone. And then against that backdrop, all those things that we know that happened last year, from SolarWinds to Kaseya, and more recently the Lapsus exploits, we know that there's staffing and budgeting deficiencies for higher ed institutions, research institutions, state institutions that are really taking their toll. We have this backdrop of doing more with less, right? And we've been at that for 2 years. And a lot of that's just, people aren't sure of the future. It's anxiety creating too. So really anxious situation. Then we see underlying protocols, our old favorites like Log4j being attacked and exploited. And from that, we see often copycat attacks. So if it was effective once, we know everyone is going after those protocols and trying to get in behind them and break them down as well. So, watching your sixes with all the vulnerabilities and the internet network traffic is also a very important concept that we need.
So these threats keep coming and there are new challenges with them. Can you talk a little bit about REN ISAC's conversation around keeping operations sustainable, especially with challenges like talent shortages or burnout? What are some of the things that REN ISAC members are talking about?
We see this a lot right now. There's a known open floodgates to the private industry. So almost all of our staff are dealing with that. All of a sudden, there's more money, there's great demand for cybersecurity talent, and a lot of the private industries are saying you can work remotely. So they've shifted the focus, and that's becoming more and more important to our cybersecurity professionals. So we know that that's going on, and now I've lost track of where I was going, so I'll just keep forging ahead. Let's see, we find that that we need new methods of communication and new ways of doing business, of integrating staff. So we're having to train our new folks up, and we're not maybe doing that face to face. So what are we using? What vehicles are we using to provide that training to new team members? How do we get people to feel that team orientation? So looking at new ways to focus on well-being, focus on community, in a new world has been a bit of a challenge, but I do feel like we're making great progress there.
What are some of the techniques that you've seen be particularly effective, or maybe even for you, in creating that kind of sustainable workplace, or at least moving towards it? I mean, it's a very challenging field.
Yeah, and that's really good raise. It's not like you can do one thing and then just forget it. Say, oh, I had that talk with staff when they started, so I'm done here. It needs to be just like we talk about security awareness. You have to rinse and repeat over and over again. You need to do that with staff, to hear them, to give them the confidence and the morale boost. Tie them into your plans and strategies and goals. That, make them feel important. So we're going through this exercise now with the REN ISAC, where we set some organizational high level goals, and then we handed that to our staff members and said, now work on your career management plans for the year, and let your goals trickle down from those high level goals. So we'll see how effective that is, right? Because it's just in process now. But really get staff to see how their responsibilities help to move organizational goals forward. Give them that boost from that. Take the time for well-being. We started doing what we called icebreakers, and they were, at the beginning of our staff meetings, and they were started out being 5 minutes, 10 minutes each. We're up to 45 minutes, and every minute of that is valuable because it allows them to connect from their home, from their offices, wherever they are. They have that personal connection. It's not the same as an in-person meeting in the hallway, but it's pretty darn good.
And you referenced that hybrid workplace component and connecting remotely. So many higher education institutions are trying to figure this out still, or are in the early stages of introducing a new hybrid workplace, and that being the long-term plan. Can you talk about this first from a cybersecurity team perspective? And you did kind of touch on that, but also what challenge this presents to higher ed cybersecurity teams for staff and instructors. What are some of the priorities there?
Another great question. Thank you. So I've read many articles about remote first, remote priority. We all know the successes of in-person, and hybrid is sort of a best of both worlds. So does that mean it's also sort of the worst of both worlds? And I haven't found much. I do a lot of reading and research, and I haven't found much to support either way. Like, what are the best things to do hybrid? Things that have worked for us have been, letting the remote people be quiet for a while if they don't feel like they're part of a boisterous team meeting in the room, and then calling them out in, not in a mean way, in a gentle way, and saying, Kristen, what are you thinking about this? And then always giving them a pass. If they don't have anything to say that's all right. Let us know if you do, or we'll come back to you later. So really facilitating that conversation, making sure they have the equipment so that they feel like they're on equal footing with the people in the room, right? So good video cameras, a standing, sitting desk if they need it, comfortable seating, making sure they don't have a bunch of wires behind them that people can see. Nobody minds a pet wandering in and out. So I always think that that's actually helpful for a conversation. So, having some personalization in your office space that you can share with other people. Show and tell. We have a crafting channel in our Slack instance where we can show and tell what we're working on. And so just making that personal connection again can help.
And then can we talk a little bit about those challenges to cybersecurity teams where they're working with work from home employees at higher ed institutions?
So we know that the burnout is a big issue. I say that COVID is the longest incident we've ever had to respond to or manage. And I stick by that. We've been at it for 2 years, and you know, we're like, okay, things may be getting back to normal, and then Omicron B comes up. So, you know, we're back to, maybe not back to the first day, March 11th of 2020, but we're back to that anxiety and concern. How do we cover staff? How do we respond? What's our business continuity models? Things like that. So one thing that helps is, again, sticking to your program, your plan, and your goals. If you have a cybersecurity program already, stick to it. Yes, you might need to tweak it, but stay the course on that. If you don't have one, what are your top 10 priorities? What are your top 3 priorities? Take that time, articulate it, develop it. Rotating staff on and off incident response duties. So if you can move people off of that, it's a very stressful life and leads to burnout. So give them a chance to use their brain in a different way, and maybe shift someone in, if you can, who is a little fresher there. Use automation whenever possible. And I know it takes different people, different skill sets and work to build that up front. But if you can take it so that they're not having to look at the risks, they're only seeing the high level risks on a day, or threats on a daily basis, perhaps that's worth the wear and tear on their brains and the anxiety. And then lastly, I would say leverage collective resources. Is there a shared SOC that makes sense for you to join? What about groups like the REN-ISAC? Can we help in any way? Are there cloud services that you know people are using that might fit your needs in that area? So, you know, taking advantage of those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And in these plans, and I've seen conversations about how important these plans are to creating this kind of sustainable response. What are some cornerstones of those plans that you've seen with institutions who are particularly successful in responding to these? What are some of the key components?
I'm a big fan of the cybersecurity framework. I think it has all the basic functions and tenets that a team needs to think about. Certainly, you have to think about incident response. I've already talked quite a bit about that, but you know, prevention, detection, education, development sorts of things. You can't just, and that's not just for your security team. Your security team needs focused knowledge on cybersecurity, but you also need that for everyone, because as I mentioned before, phishing, still initial attack vector. So we need all of our people, all of our staff and students to be educated on that and to recognize it and not be gullible towards it. So that's another ongoing component of it. Developing an organization where it's easy to get things done. You know, so when you think about HR hierarchies and things, staffing, staff organization charts, things like that, make sure you're not making it too hard on your security staff to have access to the people that they need. Security don't just work in their own bubble. They need help from your compliance people, from your privacy people, from your legal people, from your network people. They are part of a big ecosystem there that needs to have constant interaction with people in your organization.
Absolutely. So it's really laying that groundwork and thinking, where does my staff need to turn to next to get their jobs done?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for being with us today. I need to somehow get into that crafting Slack channel if that's a takeaway, but this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
You can always start your own.
Oh, that's true.
Thanks for your time, Emily.
Coming up next.
Thank you to State Scoop and Ed Scoop for hosting this important cybersecurity modernization summit and shining a light on critical issues for all levels of government. Thank you to our sponsors for their interest and partnership on technology and security-related issues. Thank you to our friends in government from around the country for their leadership and continued collaboration. Enhancing our cybersecurity posture is more important today than it's ever been, and I'm proud to join this outstanding team in seeking shared solutions to the challenges we face. I am pleased to say that my boss, Governor Kathy Hochul, has made cybersecurity and resilience a top priority. And for anyone working around the clock in the trenches here in New York, that means everything. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Angelo Tony Riddick, New York's Chief Information Officer and Director of the state's Office of Information Technology Services, better known as ITS. ITS is an integrated IT service delivery organization that provides strategic direction and IT services for 53 state agencies. It has more than 3,000 professionals who oversee more than 100,000 employee workstations, 100,000 phones, 10,000 servers, and 25 petabytes of storage. Our infrastructure is spread over 1,400 miles of fiber optic cable. As you can imagine, this makes New York State a broad target for cyber bad actors. Our agency is charged by law with protecting the state's systems. And like you, we are seeing more threats today than ever before. These attacks come with increased speed and sophistication. We are seeing phishing, credential harvesting, malware, ransomware, web application attacks, hardware and software vulnerability exploits, and so much more. We start by taking every threat seriously and communicating in real time with all those who need to know or need to share. In response to a recent uptick in traffic attempting to connect to our network with IP addresses originating in Russia, we have permanently blocked these attempts. This is our new normal. Our endpoint detection tools provide an extra layer of protection against intrusion, and we expect to extend these protections to our partners at the local level this year. While our CISO retired in December and we continue to seek a permanent replacement, ITS has a top-notch security professional and other professionals who monitor the state's network and global threat landscape all day, every day. Despite that, cyber criminals are working overtime in an effort to steal passwords, log in credentials, and even information about our state employees to use in future attacks. To fight this new cyber war, it will take more resources, more people, and better intelligence sharing at all levels of government. That's why we should all be pleased that the federal infrastructure bill includes important resources that will allow state and local governments to make significant investments in cybersecurity, including modernization of hardware and software and a new local cyber grant program. It's a great start and an acknowledgement of the challenge we face. Meanwhile, in New York, Governor Hochul's proposed budget delivers cyber-related investments. It funds year one of a comprehensive plan that will allow our state to establish a strong zero trust framework. Some say zero trust is the flavor of the month, but it means there are checks on every device, every transaction, and every request for access across our network. Ultimately, this will better protect the state's data from intrusion and attack. We will use a portion of these new state resources to enhance our Red Team, a group that tests security across executive agencies and is critical to the state's readiness to respond to real threats. The governor's budget also recommends new resources to provide local governments with expert strategic assistance and security solutions so they can better protect their own assets. For years, we have done this informally on an as-needed basis, but formalizing this partnership is part of the state's new all-in approach on cybersecurity. Recently, we joined New York City officials to announce the creation of a Joint Security Operations Center, better known as JSOC, in Brooklyn, the first of its kind in the country. This will allow the state to better share threat intelligence information with county, city, state, and federal partners, filter out the noise, and respond to real threats in real time. Our team is working with our counterparts in city government on an aggressive timetable, which includes accelerating our hiring process so JSOC is fully operational as soon as possible. New cyber threats will require us to find new and innovative solutions to protect our network and the state's critical data. We know cybersecurity is a shared responsibility that works best when all of our employees are aware and engaged. So we recently changed the frequency of our cyber awareness messages from once every 2 to 3 months to once every week. They have responded by flagging more potential attacks. The challenge is now working towards modernization, and a strengthened cyber posture will still supporting systems, but we are leaning and assisting our client agencies in planning for future state. We expect to continue to see stronger passwords and multi-factor authentication and security as a top consideration whenever we build or innovate. Cybersecurity is a defining technology issue of our time, and I cannot thank you enough for your continued collaboration. By sharing ideas and best practices in settings like these, I know we can continue to make real and meaningful progress together. Thank you for all you do. Stay safe, stay secure, and stay one town ahead of the posse.